But
Okay.
it is explicitly a topic in the interim of something else coming up to talk about right now. But if you have some other topic, I'm happy to segue.
I have come here with a reason and a purpose, apparently.
Oh, cool.
Yes, I am apparently here to discuss typologies.
Okay. So.
And why I think they're incredibly useless.
Okay. So then is the central thesis that do you want to affirm the idea that typology is sort of conceptually wrong, that it's not useful, which is what you just said, or some other more nuanced expression of your negation of the idea? You want this?
I would say it's useless, but there's probably nuance to that.
Okay, so even
the best I could tell from my previous conversation was that it turned out to mostly just be a series of slang terms for existing psychological studies.
Okay, so
that doesn't give it much room.
Let's say you were to successfully establish a lack of utility in the model, would that be sufficient to negate its worth entirely?
I think it would change people's perception of it, because people seem to attach to it as though it is its own standalone system that has its own strengths. But if it's literally just a few slang terms, like niche labels for things, then it's not really.
That's not the question I asked, though. The question I asked was, let's try to separate aside the question of utility from the question of correctness. Okay, so what I'm saying is, are we in agreement that its utility in the world, whether or not people have a useful application for it, is a different question than its correctness as an accurate model?
I mean, white noise could also be considered accurate to the same ends. It wouldn't serve any purpose, but it would exist.
White noise isn't a model, though. A model is something specific, right? It explains the mechanics of a system.
But the system has to have a point to it in order to do that. So if you undermine the utility, then you get white noise.
Let me give you an example. So plate tectonics, for example, is a way to explain why continents move around the Earth, right?
Sure.
And prior to plate tectonics becoming the dominant theory, there was the expanding Earth theory, which said the reason the continents spread apart is because the Earth is getting bigger, right? Now, we typically agree with the plate tectonics approach, and we disagree with the expanding Earth approach, correct?
Sure.
So if I can demonstrate there's an equivalent sort of categorical or qualitative distinction between typology and other approaches, in other words, that they are two ways to solve the same question, and only one of them is correct, then could we agree that at that point we don't need to discuss the utility of it any longer?
I mean, you would need to discuss the utility to show that it is the correct one. To assert that it is the correct one is like, that comes to the same problem.
That's not true. So, for example, but hold on. Let me explain. So, plate tectonics was not accepted as the meaningful explanation for continental drift until about 50 years ago. But it had been a theory for 50 years prior to that. Now, the thing is, it may be the case that some scientists can use plate tectonics to accurately predict things, but the way it actually worked was the other way around. Plate tectonics made a prediction that was proven to be correct ultimately, namely that the fault lines are jagged. They don't all go in or all go out. So intuitively, they established, okay, here's a way we can test this. Then empirically, they went out and tested it. It was proved to be true. Now, note, its truth was independent of, and remains independent of, its usefulness. It was established to be true way before any utility for it was considered.
It wasn't established as true until it was shown to be true, though. Like, until that, it was just a theory. So it wasn't true until it was proven to be true.
Right, until it passed the falsification test, which means that it sustains its truth value until new evidence disputes that. Okay, so okay,
Sure.
but the point is, that has nothing to do with its use, though, right?
It can't be used the same way until it is shown to be repeatable.
Okay.
So until it was shown to be repeatable, people couldn't use it.
So is one of your objections about typology then that it doesn't make falsifiable predictions?
Sure. I'll agree with that statement. Yes, that is my stance.
Okay. So, for example, that if that were true, you'd be right to say it's basically arbitrary. It's just an arbitrary taxonomical thing and not a model.
Sure.
Yeah. So if that were true, you'd be correct about that. But it's not true. I make falsifiable predictions. I actually have all the data you need to do the empirics too. It's just I'm too lazy to do it.
Just have to become friends with someone who wants to do it.
I gotta get some people up in this house, you know.
So this is the approach I taken to the discussion earlier. As far as I can tell, it's based on Jung's theories, which
I'm not going to defend people who get it wrong, and they're wrong.
No, that's fine. That's not really right. Where I'm taking this, it's based on existing psychology. Basically, it's trying to rewrite some of the ways in which that is interpreted, and it has its own language developed around it. But all that I would predict that has happened, and this is just the result of the last conversation I had with it, is that when psychology as a branch of science moves forward to any degree, my expectation is that typology will simply try to keep up with it by updating its language. Won't actually be offering much to the plot.
Okay, well, I mean, you're making claims about typology in general and about how typology-minded people are going to behave if and when something happens. I think what we'd be best off doing is saying, let's talk about what psychology is attempting to do and what aspects of psychology we consider more valid than other aspects and why, and then see if this meets those criteria. So, okay, we know that there's, say, research psychology or psychiatry, for example, like where they're doing research on drugs, where you have double-blind tests and you see if the drug actually has those impacts. We know that some psych drugs actually do work. My own girlfriend is on some psych drugs that work beautifully, and prior to being on them, she definitely needed them, right? So that kind of stuff is very linked to empirics in the sense that if a given drug makes a schizophrenic person, let's say, not schizophrenic anymore, then that can be tested and repeated and checked, right?
Sure.
Okay. And then there's also this aspect of psychology that you'd call practicing, which is therapy of some sort, which is like either talk therapy or, some sort of analysis that is basically a form of life coaching, I guess. So we agree that that's part of psychology too, right?
So you mentioned it utilizes analysis and what else? I missed what you said.
It's basically like kind of life coaching, like therapists or psychology. Yeah, okay. And
okay.
We also agree that there's a theoretical side to psychology, which tries to explain the whys of things. And I'll give you an example is attachment disorders. When psychologists try to explain why certain individuals behave in particularly unsustainable and or toxic ways in relationships, they turn to the person's experiences in the past as one way to explain why, as an adult, they don't seem to be properly emotionally developed, right?
Sure.
Okay. So what is it that you think typology is trying to explain? So in a correlate example. So for what I'm saying is like BPD is trying to explain persistent toxic bad behavior by an adult, and it looks to that person's particular experience as being deviant from the norm, and that's why their expression as an adult is deviant from the norm. So I'm asking you, can you give me an equivalent to what you think typology is doing?
If there is a social disconnect, I think it is trying to stitch that disconnect. That's the best understanding of what I have.
Okay, so what it's attempting to do is explain attention, paying attention. So we do know, for example, that we can have instances of attention that differ from each other. And I'll give you an example of what year did Columbus discover America? 1492 is a piece of knowledge that you have. It requires no deliberation. On the other hand, a very complicated addition problem with lots of digits would require some deliberation before you'd be able to answer it. You have to think it through. It's not knowledge. So we do understand that we have the capacity to observe human experience and make basic claims about what we observe and ask questions about those observations, right?
Sure.
Okay, so the thing is, attentional manners is a notion that says we can understand a person's affect and or personality that isn't part of affect by turning to how people in general pay attention, what the different ways of paying attention are. So you said that there's something that is just taking it from other things in psychology. So let's talk about object permanence and shape constancy. When babies are very little, they don't have object permanence yet, which means if you play peekaboo with them, then they think that you disappeared and then you reappeared or something. I don't know. But eventually they attain object permanence. So object permanence is something that does exist in psychology already, right?
Mm-hmm.
And object permanence explains an observation that we make about babies. Namely, that the reason babies stop being delighted by peekaboo is that they no longer are confused in terms of something's persistence in the absence of their experiencing it. They've linked the idea that objects outside of them persist regardless of their experiential knowledge of those things persisting. So then the question is that what is that? How does that play out in terms of personality? What we're asking is, why is it the case that my personality is the same now as it was when I was 17 years old? And I have a video clip if you want evidence of this. I have a video from high school when I was interviewed for the high school TV news, and they interviewed me about this new law in Arcadia that required teenagers to report that they were having a party to the cops before they started it. And I objected to it on various constitutional grounds and made very much the same sort of arguments I would make today. And I had totally forgotten about it. 30 years later, I saw that video. I was like, oh my God, I'm so exactly the same guy. And I read the newspaper, high school newspaper, wrote for it. Same guy, juvenile version of it, but same guy. So we want to know why it is that that I've had my experiences have been very diverse. Why has my affect remained so consistent? And or what is that thing about people that persists across time that we call an identity? How is it comprised, or how does it come to be? And how can we explain the distinctions between the way I approach the world and the way someone else approaches the world? And the reality is this: that
I see a little bit, a few different disconnects with like the information and the beliefs that are being used to sort of.
Well, keep in mind, I'm trying to keep things very breezy and simple here, rather than getting into a lot of. I'm trying to work.
I'm doing the same thing.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah.
So that is a good example that would offer towards something like the evidence of like a personality that is persisting. There might be other things in your life that you have changed your mind on, and if people were to ask you that same question 30 years later, you might actually give them a different response.
Oh, I'm sure I'm sure that's the case. I'm not talking about I have exactly the same positions. I'm saying that my affect and personality is the same.
If that is based on information that you have received, right? You might have received new information about that topic or not received new information about that topic, and that might tell you whether or not it's remained stagnant or not. I would suggest that personality is not necessarily related to the information that you hold.
like
so there might be other things that you would need to observe to figure out whether or not that is actually a distinct definition.
All right, fine. Fair enough. Let me ask you some questions. If here's a sentence. If it freezes, the tomatoes will die. Okay, that sentence comprises two statements. It freezes and the tomatoes die. In only one of the permutations is the sentence as a whole false. In which permutation is the sentence as a whole false? True, 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 false, false, true, or false, false?
That I'm not familiar with this one, and it's run by me very quickly here.
I know, but and the thing is, I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything. I'm trying to, I'm both trying to demonstrate something about attentional manners and also find something out about you. So I will repeat it though. If it freezes, then the tomatoes will die. This is a single sentence made up of two statements. The statements are it freezes and the tomatoes die. Now, in only one of the four permutations is the sentence as a whole false. Either the first statement is true and the second statement is true. The first statement is true and the second statement is false. The first statement is false and the second statement is true, or both statements are false. Only one of those four permutations makes the sentence as a whole false. Which of those four permutations makes the sentence as a whole false?
I need to consider the options a bit. This seems like a bit of a riddle almost.
I mean, so. It depends on your personality type as to whether it seems like a riddle or not. But let's see how you think it through and just see what you come up with.
I could come back to you on this one, sir, if you want to understand my personality. It's not something that I'll throw in immediate answer with.
That's fine. Let me try a different question. If some frogs like tennis and all tennis likers enjoy lemonade, can we conclude that some frogs must enjoy lemonade? Okay, so it turns out that regardless of
you said you were trying to keep things easy breezy and casual, but you're using a lot of abstracts here.
Well, I'll explain right now. I don't mean to be, what's the word? Enigmatic. Okay, I'll explain right now. So the thing is, it turns out, and I've asked these sort of questions to hundreds and hundreds of people. It turns out that there are very pretty bright line sets of styles of response. This kind of question that I ask is, who is my mother's husband in relation to me? You know the answer to that one?
Mother's husband. Wouldn't that be like a grandfather then?
Yes, correct.
Something basic?
That's correct. Okay,
so
the thing is, it turns out that more or less, regardless of education level in this matter of thing, that somebody like MC McPhee, who may still be here in the chat, she will get all these questions right away, even though she's never taken any logic classes or anything like that. And there's a whole set of people, in fact, who do that. There's another set of people that can do even better than I can do on the genealogy questions, which is to say, I can go quite some time. I can say, well, let's see, my mother's husband's wife's only sisters, only sons, sisters, mothers, only sisters, only son is me. And I can go quite some distance. But in fact, it turns out that there's this group of people who can do it even longer than me. And then there's other ones who have very, consistently similar to each other's responses to it. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there are some people, if I ask them, who is my mother's husband, they'll go, your family? There's a whole class of people who do this, okay? And have no idea even how to begin to conceptualize about these kind of questions. Now, the reality is this: we have two choices. We can mistakenly think that those people are dumb, or we can ask ourselves, why is it that they're so bad at this? And why is it that somebody else is so good at it? Concurrently, That same person, but hold on. No, wait. Let me finish before you respond. Let me finish. Now, what it turns out is that for all the hundreds of people I've tested, for the people who do the family thing on the TI test, none of them also score polar on extroverted intuition test and introverted sensing test. That's one way in which you can falsify my approach, which is say all you have to do is find one example of that, of a double polar or something, and it falsifies the whole model. And yet, despite hundreds and hundreds of actual testing of people asking these questions, okay, it's never happened. I was very slow to state this was a model. I started off saying this is not a model; it's just a taxonomy. It's basically arbitrary. So I was way ahead in terms of my critique of where you currently are, and I still ended up having to backpedal because it turns out that cognitive functions provides us a framework to understand attentional matters, and people do in fact pay attention in different ways. So that somebody who is very, very bad at coming up with ideas, for example, I have extroverted intuition tests, and I say, well, give me some names for this new invention I came up with. It's a combination coffee cup and barber's clippers. And they'll have to come up with names for it, right? It turns out people who are polar at that, who can only come up with one name, maybe, that those people are never also unable to do the grandma granddad questions. Now, why is that? That some people can get no new ideas at all, but they're never the same people who also can't do the logic questions at all. Given the fact that I didn't know this ahead of time and made it as a hypothetical prediction, and it's borne out by the evidence, at least I'm doing the process right, correct?
Okay, I'm going to just go back to one instance here that just sort of piqued my interest as you were discussing it. You said, first, we mistakenly may think they're dumb at first, right? So instead, we are asking the question, why are they bad at this? But to me, you just rephrasing the same thing. What I would be asking instead is, why are people not answering it the way that you're expecting it?
No, that's okay. First of all, why do you think I have expectations about their answers?
Because you posed an opinion on it. You said it was a bad answer or it was a dumb answer, potentially.
Well, it's incorrect. So, if P then Q...
No, it's not incorrect. It's not correct to your standards.
No, listen. For example, in basketball, a three-pointer counts as a three-pointer. Now, you might say, well, it's not really a three-pointer, it's just according to basketball standards. But in basketball, we use basketball standards, right? So right now we're talking about logic. And in logic, it is absolutely the case that if P then Q and not Q, therefore not P, there's no possible way to validate any other answer than that as correct.
Yeah, there is. You can approach it colloquially.
Okay,
and
well,
if you're asking the question colloquially,
within its frame, I said.
Okay, right.
Within its frame.
Did you preface your question to every single one of these hundreds of people and say, now you're going to answer this in a logical framework, not a colloquial framework?
No, and that's the beautiful thing about it. It turns out some people automatically, instinctually, consistently, whether they know anything about it or not, answer things through that logical framework, and some people persistently, whether they have any reason to or not, question the legitimacy of that framework because it's so black and white, and because it's a frame and not a metaframe. But it's not claiming to be a metaframe.
But it's unclear when you ask the question. It hasn't been defined.
I'm not. People pay me to tell them what type they are. Okay. Now the thing is this: when I ask a question, if in fact I told them in advance that this question is testing your TI, and here's why I'm asking it, and here's what I'm looking to see, and here's what you're going to do, blah blah blah, you would have then given me the same answers to that question, no matter how well you understood why I was asking it.
Again, if the question is lacking the definition that you were using to draw the answer,
you have to be honest.
You just
got to be honest.
Basically, random results.
I address that. Don't dissemble. Now, look, I address this, right? We have to be honest. So what I'm saying is, it doesn't matter how much I explain to you my framework. You would have performed the same on those TI questions, right?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so now that you understand the framework that I'm testing here, let's try a few more, okay? We'll see how you do. And remember, I've got a shit ton of data to compare against. So I'll know exactly where on the levels of competency within its own frame you will attain. Okay, so now that you understand the frame, can I ask you some TI questions and you'll get them right?
So before we continue that, do you already have a presupposed notion of what my answers will be? Are you making a prediction?
No, I'm saying what I'm predicting.
Okay.
Listen, the predictions I make are defensible ones, not indefensible ones. Okay, so for example, I'll say a prediction will be if you perform meow on meow, then you will also perform meow on meow. That's a meaningful prediction you can actually test, right?
Debatable, but we could still try it and find out.
Okay, I take a short intermission. I'm gonna smoke a cigarette. I mean, as a matter of fact, it's depressing because, of course, that's
I would say this.
No, stop and listen. Stop and listen. Hold on, stop. Because, of course, that is exactly how you do it right. Is you say, okay, so I'm going to link these things so that we can control the display of data and have it meaningfully linked to something. And for you to say that's debatable, like my approach is kind of questionable. I mean, my word, at that point, you're really talking out of both sides of your mouth. You come in here claiming to care about processes, and when I explain to you my methodologies and they're totally legitimate, you say that's questionable. That's concerning.
All right, I'm gonna get to be questioned. That's very strange.
I'm gonna get some food.
No, I love it being questioned. I just don't like the dishonesty about the answer. In other words, when you ask that question, you should have had in mind, I'll know he's serious. I'll know Eric's serious if he gives the answer that I actually gave you. What's your criteria? What is your criteria?
The reason I bring this up, right, is because if you are in a particular frame of mind to solve a particular type of question, then you are more likely to get those correct in the same way. Like if I say, okay, we're going to sit down and answer.
Well, you have a chance to prove that
basic
right now.
short multiplication.
You have a chance to prove that right now.
If you just throw them at me immediately, if you just say, oh, what's 17 times 62, I'd have to think about it and it would be complex and
we can test that right now. We can test this thesis right now. We can test this thesis right now. I'll give you more of those TI questions and we'll see if you do better.
Right, but you're testing for two things, and that's what the issue is under.
What are the two things I'm testing for? I'm asking you the same kind of questions.
A, my personality type, which is the first thing that you're testing for.
No, I'm not testing.
B, which is what I'm proposing as a frame of mind.
No, I'm right now testing your thesis that you presented, that in fact, your awareness of my thinking, my frame of reference, going into asking the question, that your full understanding of what I'm looking for as an answer, quote unquote, is critical to your performance. I'm saying, let's test that thesis. I'm not testing multiple things. I'm testing one thing. We've got a perfect way to test it too. We set it up beautifully. We have a baseline to compare against. We can ask the same kind of questions again and find out if you're right. Would you like to do that?
You're making an assertion there that I don't think is correct. You're saying that we're testing for one thing. I don't think you're testing for one thing.
No, I just told you what I'm testing for. I said, let's test your thesis. You made a claim.
What is my thesis?
You made a claim that whether or not how you perform on this is going to be contingent upon your awareness of what the question is looking for you to say ahead of time. We've now discussed that, so you have full information about that. So let's ask those questions again and see if you actually perform better.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. So can you give me the missing generalization? These ones are fairly straightforward. I'll give you an example, okay? Those people can't come in here. They're not poets. The missing generalization is only poets can come in here. The missing generalization has to start with only, no, or all, okay? Now, how about this? There's no way they like lettuce. They're from Iceland.
Do I finish that statement?
Yeah, you're doing the missing generalization that I just demonstrated.
what was the start of it again?
Let me give you the example again. Let me give you the example again. So the example is, those people can't come in here. They're not poets. And the missing generalization, the answer you provide is only poets can come in here. Now, note the generalization, the answer you're going to provide is going to start with either all, no, or only. Okay? So here's the question I just asked you again. So those people can't possibly like lettuce. They're from Iceland.
So only people from Iceland like lettuce? Or, yeah, was that way or the other way around? I forget.
No people from Iceland like lettuce is the correct answer. It's the best answer. There are other correct answers. You didn't give one, though. Now, okay, how about this? If either Joe or Mary has lupus, then Judine will wear a mask. Judine is not wearing a mask. Can we conclude that both Joe and Mary do not have lupus?
Yes.
Okay. Only people from Egypt build pyramids. I'm building a pyramid. Can we conclude that I'm from Egypt?
Yes.
Okay. If there are 6 avocados in a barley share and 4 barley shares for every bucket, how many avocados are there per bucket?
4.
Okay. So, how about if okay, so let me ask you. Okay, I'm going to ask you the hats question. There's a jail, okay, and there's 3 prisoners and a warden, and the warden calls prisoners in and says, "Hey, listen, if you guys are going to play a game, if you get it right, I'll let you go free. If you get the answer right. If you get the answer wrong, I'll kill you. However, you can also choose to not answer." I say, "Okay, we get it." So now in this bag there are 5 hats. There are 3 red hats and 2 white hats. 5 total hats in the bag. You can't look in the bag first. You're going to pull out a hat at random and put it on your head. It's a little party hat. So when I take your blindfolds off, you'll be able to see the other prisoners' hats, but you won't be able to see your own. If you can tell me what color hat you're wearing, you'll get to go free. So the first prisoner pulls the hat up, puts the hat on. Second one, blah, blah, blah. They're all blindfolded, right? They all now have hats on that they picked randomly from this bag of 5 hats. Again,
sorry, what was the color combinations?
3 reds, 2 whites, okay? Now, the warden says to the first guy, okay, here's your blindfold off. Look at your other prisoners. Tell me, what color is your hat? He says, I can't tell you. I don't know. The guy goes, okay, fine. Second prisoner, take off your blindfold. Look at the other guy. Tell me what color is your hat. Second guy says, I don't know. Third guy says, you don't need to take off my blindfold. I know what color hat I don't know what color my hat is. And he tells the warden what color his hat is, and the warden lets to go free. What color was his hat, and how did he know? So this is a very difficult question. Most people don't get it. It's not necessarily a TI question explicitly. It's also an intuition question. But the thing is, what I'd like to point out is this following thing, and this is what I'm sort of working towards gradually, is if you are correct and you perform better on this TI test after you understand the frames of reference, then there's a good chance you're an FI dumb, because that's consistent with a couple of other things. Like now, if you're an ISFP FI dom, there are two kinds of FI doms. If you're an ISFP, then you will also perform you'll totally be terrible at any test. Give me some possible names for my coffee cup invention, right? It's a coffee cup with a barber's razor attached to it. And I can't come up with any good names. Marketing wants me to come up with some snappy names for this new product. Can you come up with any?
For a coffee cup, you're asking two questions at once now.
No, I'm saying I came up. I forget the hats question. Okay, forget the hats question. So I'm saying I came up with a new invention. It's a coffee cup with a hair razor attached to it. Can you help me come up with a name for my new invention to help it sell? A snappy, poppy name?
Sure, it's the cup razor.
Okay. Any others?
No.
Okay. How about this? Let's try an inky pinky game. Here's an example. I'm going to give you the clue. It's something like this. Hilltop water spout. I'm going to tell you how many syllables each of the words in the answer has. 2. And you're going to give me the answer mountain fountain. The answer is always going to rhyme, and it's going to mean what the clue does. So again, the clue is hilltop water spout. It's 2 syllables, and the answer you give is mountain fountain. Another example. Roadway flesh. It's a 1-1. Now, in this answer, it's street meat. Okay? So let me give you one now and see how you do. This is a early morning front yard. It's at 1-1. Early morning front yard, or 1-1.
Hold on. You've said hilltop water spout. That's 2 words, but the syllables in hilltop is 2, and the syllables in water spout is like 3.
Right, but the answer is mountain fountain. That's the clue. The clue can have however many syllables or words, but the answer is 2 mountain fountain.
Sure.
So here the clue is an early morning front yard, and the answer is a 1-1. It rhymes.
That's very abstract.
Okay. So you're an ISFP. So this is what you just did is test polar.
Sure.
No, listen. So the thing is, people who are good at listen. I have so much data, so much information for you. I've tested 1 million people on these questions, and what I can tell you is you are at the very bottom minute percentage of effectiveness at extroverted intuition, and you're somewhere in the middle in introverted thinking, and that means that you have polar NE. You cannot pay attention in the way that is my dominant way of paying attention. You can barely do it at all. You can come up with one name for a new invention. I would say the sipping cup, the razor caffeinator, the barber and chew, the black stuff in a mug makes for haircuts on your mug. I can come up with infinite.
I'll just stop you there.
I can come up with
infinite because I am entirely capable of doing
Then do it. Then you make an inky pinky for me.
But hold on. The question, there's a lot going wrong with the criteria for the question, right? And how you're deriving that answer.
Okay, how many synonyms can you think of for the word aghast?
It doesn't matter how many synonyms. Like, again, I have to roll back here. The criteria that you're setting up for each of these questions and how I'll answer them is dependent on so many external variables that
no, it's not.
I have to choose one of them on the fly to meet your criteria.
Not. How many pull-ups can you do?
Change.
How many pull-ups can you do? We can line each other next to each other and see who can do more. You are terrible at this kind of pull-up. Or you are being intentionally bad at it just because you want to be difficult or something. There's no disputing this. Remember, I'm comparing you against literally hundreds of different people who've answered these questions. I'm not pulling this out of my ass.
So again, if we go back to where this was originating from, you asked me the questions the first time, and I could not answer them at all because I had no frame of where this was coming from. You reframed it and you made specific what the intent was, and I had some ability to answer them.
Yes.
I am sure that if I went back over them and, I don't know, practiced them or thought more about them, I'd be able to answer them probably fluently. However, all of these things
sure too. But listen,
but
you're making my point for me. You see, there are a set of people who who are not, their ability to do that is not impacted by their experience of practice. That it's not impacted by their frame of reference. That say people who are TI DOMs, or me, for example, I would never even question for a second why you were asking a TI question. I'd immediately, instinctively, intuitively approach it as it's meant to be approached, because that's my DOM, that's my natural conscious frame of reference. Your natural conscious frame of reference, hold on. Your natural conscious frame of reference, in contrast, is one of an interested calculus and a solvency-based approach. That's why you're concerned about utility. The difference is there are two competing logics, right? There's utility logic, and then there's language logic. What I'm saying is this model upholds best under both. And you are saying, no, it doesn't, because my own frame of reference is what it is. That's not a good reason for you to say that, you know?
All right, so you've already set up a framework here. You've asserted one of what is a correct answer and what is an incorrect answer. My version of utility may not match what your version of utility is. Even if we're both looking for a utilitarian answer, we may give different results.
Okay, well, that's true. That is absolutely true. But that's why I'm not asking you how useful is this, or how good is this, or questions like that. I'm asking you questions that correlate with the pull-up. So in other words, I can actually see whether or not you respond instinctively in this kind of manner of deliberation, or in this kind. So because you use instinctively a non-binary manner of deliberation, that is to say, you understand what the goal or outcome is, and then you attain the means to get there, then you're not, as a consequence, going to intuitively, naturally go to the TI questions as TI questions, but as something that we need to know the frame of reference about first. With the extroverted intuition, it's even more so. It's like, how many synonyms can you come up with for something? Or how many of these inky-pinkies you can come up with? We can actually count them. We can time it. I mean, it's as empirical as pull-ups. So what you are doing, sir, is being disingenuous in assembling. It is not like that. It's not what you said at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite of that. It is something empirical and meaningful. We need to explain the differences in the results in some way that makes sense.
So let me pose to you this, right? In your system, if you were able to accurately determine whatever my type was, would you then be able to reframe the questions around my type for me to be able to accurately answer them every time?
No.
Why not? If you understand the system of what appeals to my mind to be able to give the correct result, then you should be able to develop questions that way.
Because that's not what an intentional manner is. What I'm saying is, if you were in fact extroverted intuition polar, unless you're intentionally trying to not come up with any ideas, right? If you actually are extroverted intuition polar, it wouldn't matter how much time I gave you to practice this, or how much I went over with you, or how much I tried to get you to do it well. I have an ISTP student who I work with later today, in fact, and I pull my hair out because she just cannot ideate. The thing is, it doesn't matter, right? That's what makes this correct. You can know about it all you want, and you can practice it all you want. If it's actually your polar, you still won't be able to do it.
So how do you know that's just not a shortcoming of your teaching ability?
Did you listen to anything I said?
Yes, I listened to all of it.
Okay, so I've got a 5th grade girl who's an ISTP. She's a TI DOM. When I ask her those logic questions, she gets them immediately, all of them, right away, without any explicit training in the matter at all. Now, how could that possibly be? Well, because it turns out that a binary communicative approach towards analysis is a way of paying attention. And for example, my tool function is this logic thing. So I'm always parsing things in terms of whether the words make sense. And sometimes that's at the expense of whether reality makes sense. But logic isn't about reality, it's about words. Okay,
so again, well, I kind of want to approach this from my own side here and just see how this reflects on your system here. The criticism that I have of the way that you are analyzing these things is you are asserting what a correct response is. So any question that is answered, any question that is asked can have multiple answers to it. I could ask you what 2 + 2 is. You could say it's 4. That would be a logical answer. You could also answer that question with your own question, or you could answer it with a non-response, or you could answer it with something that's unrelated. All of these different possibilities exist. So for you to say 4 is the correct answer, it's correct to your standard because you are looking for a logical answer. If you're not necessarily looking for a logical answer,
but listen to me. But hear what I'm saying, though. Actually, hear what I'm saying. So what I'm saying is, some people think like you do, that in fact, the correct answer is only correct within its frame of reference. Some people default to assuming the correct answer within its frame of reference is the universal correct answer. And they consistently do it. And just as you consistently make this argument, right? So the thing is, the point I'm making is not that whether your answer is correct or not, but how you think about whether your answer is correct or not is consistent with what you're doing. And so it's like the fact that I prefer this frame of reference, and you're saying, what's wrong here, Eric, is you're defaulting to a frame of reference and trying to impose it on everybody. But I'm not doing that. I'm saying, I recognize the fact that this is my default frame of reference. Is it yours as well? Oh, it's not. Well, what is your default frame of reference? Okay, let's see if these things match up. So if your default frame of reference is this, then are you going to be really bad at this? Well, it turns out that when we actually test these correlations out, or the links out, that it's consistent. The data is consistent with it. It doesn't falsify.
But you're conflating those two things.
What two things?
Whether it's correct and whether it matches your standard.
No. You're not. Again, try to hear what I'm saying. I'm not conflating anything here. I'm saying that you could answer these questions in the way that you are, where you're challenging the legitimacy of the frame. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying you're wrong for challenging. No, listen to me. I'm not saying you're wrong for challenging the legitimacy of the frame. I'm saying that certain segments of the population consistently do that, and certain segments of the population default to not challenging this frame at all. Why? Are they dumber or less aware than you? I mean, because you default to this frame. So why? Is it because you're dumber or less aware than them? No, it's because the frames of reference are different, right? So one way of talking about a cognitive function or a channel of attention is called an attentional manner, right? A way of paying attention. And the thing is, you pay attention to why these binary black and whites are inadequate, but not everybody does. You consistently pay attention that way, and other people consistently pay attention some other way.
Again, I'll be doing that based on context as well. You could ask me other questions.
Yes,
let's say
you will consistently be doing it based on context, right?
No, let's say that we have a topic which I am extremely well versed in, right? I won't be questioning so much the criteria of it because then I'll just be providing you answers.
So that's not a
right?
context?
And then
that's not
all
a
of a sudden,
context? Hold on. I'm confused.
I'm
confused. Can you please clarify for me? You just said, no, it's not consistently according to context. And then you said, for example, here's a context in which I behave specifically according to the context. How does that validate?
Because that's not being tested for in your criteria.
No. I asked
that's what I'm saying.
Let's talk about context. Stop. Let's go back. Let's talk about context, okay? Now, you said that how you respond to everything is according to context, right? And then I said,
even that.
And I said, that's consistent, right? And you said, no, there are instances where I don't respond to context. For example, in this specific context, I respond according to that specific context. Did you not just do that? Yes, you did.
Right, but if that is dependent when you ask the question, that's not being taken into account.
What? What did you just say?
You're not asking the same question twice in different contexts. You're asking the same question. You're not testing for that.
Again, you keep thinking you know what I'm testing for, and you get to determine that.
Right, and
but
you've already told me what it is. We established that earlier. You said you're testing.
Hold on.
You already said.
Hold on.
I don't need to hold
Stop and listen, for God's sakes.
You already stated specifically earlier that we were
me.
testing for logical outcomes. That is the framework I was using.
No, I'm not. Listen to me. For God's sakes, dude. You have to be honest. Okay, I don't mind our friends conflicting, that's fine, that's normal. But don't be dishonest. Now,
I have not been dishonest.
You certainly just were. I try to point out, hold on, it's very easy, sir. When I say you just blatantly contradicted yourself, acknowledge that. It's the least a human being can do to be a decent interactive partner with somebody else. When you are clearly have made a mistake, acknowledge and learn from it.
Again, this was not a mistake, and I will explain why. when we began the discussion, you asked me a series of questions. I answered them in a pretty shaky manner. Then you said, what I am testing for is logical outcomes. So when you asked the questions again, I reapproached that using the best logic that I could. It was still kind of shaky, but I think there were an improvement on the previous approach.
There was a slight improvement.
But now you are saying, I don't know what you're testing for. That means you were either
because
testing for logic or you were dishonest in the way that you're presenting the question.
No, because I'm not talking about the general frame of reference here. We actually had something specific in front of us, namely the issue of how you behave differently according to different contexts. Okay. Now, I would point out that generally I don't behave differently according to different contexts. I should do so more. Now, you apparently believe you do consistently or mostly behave differently according to different contexts. So you and I are different, right? Or are you going to try to muddy that as well?
No, I could accept that as a statement.
Okay, so then when I said, so are you consistent in your being contextually responsive? And you said no. And then you gave me an example of a context in which you were responsive to the context. Did that not happen? That's what we're testing here. Okay, good. So now we're making progress.
That's not an inconsistency.
It's not an inconsistency.
You asked me if I was inconsistent by the way of which the frameworks of which I was answering a question. And then you asked, in another context, are you consistent? And I said, yes. So in this context, no. In another context, yes. That is consistent.
So but that's what I said. I said, so you're consistently contextually responsive. And you said no.
I think there's a crosswire in that question.
No, I think you're being avoidant. Look, the point is, it is true that some people are very much more responsive to context than others, and it is true that people who use a high resolution interested calculus have a much more responsive approach to those things than people who use a low resolution binary calculus like me. That's true. And so the thing is, I guess you don't like it being explained, because everything you're saying, everything we've heard, everything that's happened here, I've tried to validate legitimately. Like I said, okay, I point out that, remember, we're comparing against huge sets of data, and that they tend to fall into these bright line classes of response. That, for example, I don't know if you're able to do any extroverted intuition or not, because you're not really willing to answer the question of whether you're actually trying or not. You insist that you need to know more about the context before you can even answer the question about whether you're really trying. And so what I'm saying is, the thing is, I'm demonstrating a pull up and saying, can you do one of these? There are some people who go, of course I can, and jump right up there and do a bunch of them, show off how great they are at it. And some people who you do a couple after you show them, they go like this. And some people who can't do them at all. And you're trying to make it into something that's different than that. So it's like, your class of TI answer is a class of TI answer that's not on either end of the spectrum. It's somewhere in the middle, right? And that's okay. It doesn't tell us much about your type as a consequence. And that's okay. Because we have another test that turns out to tell us a lot more about your type because of your specific type. When you have extrovert intuition in the polar slot, then it's almost impossible for you to do an inky-pinky. On the other hand, if you have extrovert intuition in the dominant slot like me, or an ENFP, then those things come incredibly naturally to you. And it seems like the easiest thing in the world. When asked to come up with a bunch of invention names, you jump at the chance to show off how many you can come up with, because that's how you are. People say, well, Eric, why do you upload so many videos? Why do you talk so much? I mean, I've always been this way. I've always talked this much. Why? I mean, well, you're extroverted. Okay, well, what does that mean exactly? We don't have any meaningful definition of it if they're attributes.
To follow that through logically, right? Mm-hmm. You're equating the same skill that it takes to do marketing with the extroverted trait that it takes to release videos. Is that correct?
No, I'm saying generating random ideation is something that can be empirically tested very easily. How many different random ideas can you generate related to this thing in this amount of time? And the fact that you interpret it as a marketing thing, which is actually an introverted intuition thing, is also suggestive that you're unipolar. You misunderstand even what the nature of extroverted intuition is even when I demonstrate it, you still try to frame it in terms of finding the singular best answer rather than finding a bunch of random shit. That's totally consistent with extroverted intuition polar. SSWAT.
So no, I still need to reel back to this question here. You've given 2 examples of what extroversion can include. So
okay.
Let's treat this like
question
you asked me.
Hold on.
If extroverted people are people that will use marketing to come up with
okay. I'm sorry. That's my bad. I'm operating in a context where I'm used to people understanding kind of jargony stuff that is not fair for me to expect you to know. So that's totally my bad. Let me explain more clearly what I mean. We use the term extroverted as an attribute to describe people generally who talk a lot or who are busy, active, out in the world. But in typology, extroversion is not considered an attribute that people have. The reason I'm an extrovert is because I have extroverted intuition as the dominant function in my stack. What that means is it is my nature to always come up with more ideas, to always talk and come up with more words. I'm always making new things and never organizing and keeping track of the things I've already made. As a general rule, I'm much more prioritized towards making something new than I am to exploiting an existing resource. And some people are the opposite of that. But in my case, that's how it is. So what I was saying about extroversion was a big mistake on my part because I conflated 2 different things there. I didn't conflate them, but I referenced 2 different things. I didn't clarify what I meant. Namely, I use the word extroverted colloquially here in the sense that
can I get it?
Yeah, let me just finish saying what I mean so you can respond to what I mean before you respond to what you think I mean, okay? What I'm saying is that I use the word extroverted colloquially to express an extroverted affect as it's typically understood to be. But that typologically, I don't make any claims about extroversion in and of itself. I'm saying that I have a specific attentional matter called extroverted intuition in the dominant slot, and that's why I have a colloquially extroverted affect, okay?
Okay, so I'm just going to jump back to this point. If you are looking at extroversion, right, extroversion can manifest in different ways. Extroversion can manifest in a way that agrees with what the sort of stereotypical understanding of that would be. That would be the colloquial definition. And then it could also manifest in a way that is completely opposite to that.
No, I didn't say that at all. Did you listen?
I know you didn't say that. That's what I'm asserting.
You're saying that extroversion, okay, but okay. So remember what I started with. I'm not making any claims actually about extroversion at all. Okay, that it was my mistake to use the term independently of a function because in typology we have a model that says essentially paying attention is like executing a function in math, and depending on what kind of function is how you're interacting with certain kinds of objects or information. It's like any map, it is a map, okay? It's not the territory. So we get to judge it as to whether or not it works well as a map and validates according to mapping validation criteria, not according to non-mapping criteria. That you might say, well, that's arbitrary, but it's appropriate in the same way it's appropriate to use basketball rules when playing basketball.
I can agree with all that.
Okay, so extroverted intuition is not extroversion. Extroverted intuition is the ability to generate ideation, and it comes to some extent at the expense of singularity. What's the singular best answer? And who can come up with the singular best answer and who can come up with the most answers are 2 separate tests. And the thing is, you might say, well, the best is arbitrary. That's a matter of your opinion and your frame of reference. But the most is not. That's quantitative.
That breaks down here because if there is a certain threshold that people are expecting to meet, right? If you're looking for most, I might come up with I'll compare myself here. This would be a hypothetical, right? One person might come up with 10 responses, and the other hypothetical person might also come up with 10 responses. the ideas might range from terrible to amazing, right? 1 to 10. And both of them, even if they have the exact same ideas, right? If there is a threshold that they think, oh yeah, this is an acceptable answer to give, I don't think this answer, if I give it, would be socially embarrassing. If I come up with a really bad answer, maybe that would be socially embarrassing, right? So the person who has no social embarrassment will give every answer, even the very bad answers, and the other person will give only the very best answers. So they will give 2 answers, right?
But hold
even
on,
if they both come up with 10 answers. So they will
wait. So, but there's, first of all, it is not the case that everybody evaluates these questions through that frame of reference of avoiding embarrassment. Some people, for example, have strengths they want to show off, right? So what if...
That's 2 examples. There's a billion examples.
But listen to me, though.
There's so many.
But hear what I'm actually saying. But actually listen to the words I'm saying. So I'm saying quantitative, right? And you're saying, well, but they're going to feel as though that's an adequate answer. But some people want to go like, oh, this is my wheelhouse. I want to show off. Now, regardless of anything else, if somebody behaves in that way to the question, then obviously they feel like I understand what they're looking for, and I understand intuitively what they're looking for, and I believe I can do well on this. Is that correct?
Sure, but again, how it manifests.
Okay, so
if someone wants to show off, that might manifest a different way. They might.
But you're not like that about that, right?
The best answers.
But look, you're not like that though, right? You don't jump at the chance to show off how many ideas you can come up with, right?
I might in other circumstances.
Okay, so but
in a very meta level, by questioning your critical theory here, I might be showing off the fact that I can deconstruct it.
I mean, you haven't deconstructed it because you didn't come in with any knowledge about what my explanation was at all. You didn't do any.
I don't need to do that.
So you're saying you can successfully deconstruct my model without knowing what it is?
I can deconstruct the aspects of it which are presented.
Well, sure. But so far, what's happened is you've said that how well you'll answer a TI question depends on how clearly the frame is made to you. And you've proven, in fact, that with clarity on the frame, you can improve someone in that. I've pointed out that falls completely within a clear, bright line set of responses that consistently I get to this sort of thing. I'm increasingly thinking you actually might be an INFJ. I'm not sure exactly what type you are. But regardless, what I know is that your extrovert intuition is not in the front stack, which is to say it's not a conscious function that you willfully and consciously prioritize and value. What is this notion that you are successfully intellectually engaging with this. That's very much a priority for you to be perceived as having successfully intellectually engaged with this. So, okay, that's great. But
hold on, I'll break that down as well. You are asserting that is what my priority is, but let's say theoretically, right? I'm a total whore, right? Hypothetically, I'm a total idiot. I may want to express these things. I may not be capable of it. What you are testing for is my.
You keep saying that. No, you keep saying that. What I'm pointing out is that people give certain kinds of responses, different kinds of responses to the same question. You don't disagree with that. When I point out that they fall into certain very clear, bright line sets, certain kinds of them, not the middle ones, but the polars are very clearly distinct from things that aren't, and the data is very consistent with that. You don't want to know whether or not you should validate this. You want to dispute it anyway. Or you're trying to, right? So I've explained to you, extrovert intuition, generating quantity of things, is something that some people, without any contextual specificity, accept the fact that they're having a typing session, right? It's always the same context, so we eliminate that contextual variant, right? It's always the same context. They're having a typing session.
You've eliminated one contextual barrier. There is contextual barriers for every variable that could come into play.
Well, sure. But the thing is, all the people I'm testing are being tested in the same context. So that's not relevant.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are. They're in a 1 hour typing session with me by video conference. How much more the same context can you get?
Okay, what about their context? That's your context. You're providing it from the same context, but you're not taking into account their context, their environment, their mindset.
Well, the thing is this. Fortunately, what I have is stacks and stacks of data that show that certain people respond in consistently the same way to certain kinds of prompts, and that you are an example of that. So I've given you lots of good reasons to think that we're looking at things as something that correlates with some sort of skill. But you've not asked, well, what might correlate with these skills that's not an intentional mind? What's an alternate explanation for this? What is an alternate explanation?
For what?
Well, what I've just expressed, that when I do a certain test in the same context for hundreds of people, I get blocks of data that link up with, for example, a small percentage of people have the same complete inability to do anything on this thing. It's like they don't even get the idea of it. And I have 3 tests that you can validate in this way, even though there are 8 functions. I've only come up with 3 tests. So the reason I only have 3 tests is why? Because I'm doing it properly. I'm making sure that the test actually does what it says it does before I include it as a polar test. That's a good reason to do that, because I have to argue with people like you. So I need to be able to say, your objections are right about typology in general, and I'm the exception to that because I have plenty of logic and empirics. When people dispute what I'm saying anyway, then it's a little disturbing, because you came in saying you wanted to see typology uphold a higher standard. I presented you an example of it, clear as day. It's empirically supported that we have something that needs an explanation, that is easily explained by attentional manners, and yet you're just trying to dissemble and say, well, it depends on context. That's not a general warrant to anything.
No, what you're doing is you're proving that in a solipsistic context. To you, it is making sense. To you, it is repeatable. To you, all of these things.
Okay, but see, I'm not making that claim. I'm claiming that it's actually repeatable. That, in fact, everybody I've ever tested who's gotten polar NE, and I've checked to see if, in fact, the hypothesized prediction, they then won't have polar TI or SI, if that's validated. It's validated in hundreds of instances. I'm telling you that. You can call me a liar. You can call me too biased to objectively evaluate the data. You can't pretend as though I'm not telling you that.
Okay, so you've already established here that your personality may or may not set how correct the answer is. In the same way,
Did you hear what I just said? Did you hear what I said? You are not saying back to me what I said. You're saying back to me something completely different. I say back to you what you say and then responding to it. You say back to me what I say and then respond to what I said, not what you want me to say. But what I said is, if in fact we were onto something significant here at all, then we'd be able to make a hypothesis that says, okay, if in fact this is an attentional manner thing, it's going to play out like this. Somebody who according to the criteria that I set, arbitrarily, let's say, score very low on this kind of question, won't also score that low on this and this kind of question. It's a very concrete, specific, limited hypothetical prediction. It's derived from the modeled understanding of the mechanics of things, and it's validated consistently hundreds of times. Now, I'm making that claim. You are trying to say that nevertheless, this is non-empirical, purely contextual, and arbitrary. So you can do that, you can say that, but the only way you can really make that claim that this is just context and arbitrary stuff is to either say that I'm lying to you about the data, that I'm too biased to recognize that my data doesn't actually support my hypothesis, or that I don't know what else you could say. What I've just given you is what it looks like when something is properly done.
No, the latter option that you provided there does match what I think. I think the bias is not recognized.
Okay, so that's totally to be expected. I get that. If
I was just going to cover one point
if
as
that's
well.
driving, if that's driving argumentation, I understand that. You're making a judgment about me, not my argument.
Okay, hold on. I just want to cut back to this because I think I can get on track with what you're saying there. I just wanted to cut back to this first because if you're asking a certain type of question and then expecting that a similar answer will be provided for a different question, it may just be that those questions are asking something similar of the person, so they will provide the answer.
Okay, well, what I'm telling you is, if I ask you to repeat back to me a series of sequential, non-significant events from your morning,
Yep.
There are some people, I shit you not, who literally cannot remember. I asked them a question, what did you have for breakfast? What did you have for breakfast this morning?
Let me think. What did you have for breakfast? I don't know. On Sundays, I'd be able to tell you. On this day, no. I'm struggling.
Well, what did you do for an hour before starting this conversation?
I was playing some video games.
Okay. So the thing is, this is an SI polar test. It doesn't tell me a lot about their type unless they have the following kind of response consistently. So what did you have for breakfast this morning? Well, I usually have coffee and a muffin. Is that what you had this morning? Well, usually I get up around 8 and I blah, blah, blah. But is that what you actually did this morning? I mean, like, I don't understand. But you keep saying you usually do this. Can you tell me specifically, like, I walked to the thing, I got a fork, I went to the fridge, I blah, 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 blah. Can you do that for me? I don't know, dude.
I feel like I would answer that. If you asked me that every day of the week, I'd probably give you 7 different responses at different levels.
Mm-hmm. Right. And some people would consistently give me the response I just gave you about every kind of SI question. Some people, when I ask them for specific examples, they give me more introverted intuition type answers. They don't give me specific examples. And they consistently do that. And they do it without even having any awareness that they're not doing it.
Okay, so like I said, I think we're getting back on the same track here. I'll roll the conversation forward again and figure out where this is leading. If you're saying that this is not based on bias and not a claim where I think you're lying, because I don't think that's the case. I think it's potentially more like a bias thing. How is it you would go about showing that it is not a bias? Like how would you show it that it is more empirical and more intersubjective or provable?
Okay, so of course, that question and this line of argumentation is itself representative of you consistently displaying the same frame of reference. The fact is, my bias is irrelevant to the question of whether I'm correct. The arguments themselves have all the information you need and withstand your scrutiny on their merit, as they have withstood everyone's scrutiny.
No, you don't know where I'm coming from when I'm asking this question. That is also an assumption. I may be asking it in an open way or a closed way.
So, okay, explain me what assumption I drew about your question.
You said the question was being asked in the same frame of reference that I was using to answer the other questions. I think that was an assertion. I'm asserting that I have changed course and I'm using the same reference.
Okay, but that's consistent with your continual shifting of frames, right? In order to say that, you would need to tell me what the variable is that shifts those frames. What for example, that thing you just did right there. That thing you just did right there, where you say, no, I won't address it within the frame you set. I'm going to meta up and insist on reframing, is a thing you consistently have done throughout this conversation, right? No, I've done it in many scenarios in this conversation, but not all. So you're right. Look, maybe consistently was the wrong word to use. Okay, that you've demonstrated multiple times throughout this conversation, right? Sure. And lots of people, when I talk to them, you're not an ISFP. I was wrong in my initial assessment. Lots of people, when I talk to them, they have zero engagement on the subtextual or meta level. So that's, it's the thing is, you're wishing to maintain, I guess, conditionality on the map level is understandable and generally a safe instinct. But when it becomes your frame itself, and if you tell me that it's contextual, then it's your frame itself. That's what I mean by that, right? It's absolute relativism, not relative absolutism. So
okay, let me ask you an important question here. Okay, so this is a bit strange because I may be asking it in the same way, but the question is, how do you know when I am applying things to the same mapping system and how I have gone and in which circumstances I have gone off that mapping system and trying something else? How do you determine that?
Okay, so the thing is, there are different kinds of questions that I ask in typology. Some of them are more concretely linked to an essential manner than others. So, for example, okay, so if I'm asking a skills question like how many synonyms can you come up with? Can you come up with inky pinkies for me? Can you answer inky pinkies? How do you do on the remote associations test, which is a test I found on the internet that I have people do to see how, and, you know, some of these things correlate more strongly or more loosely with certain concrete things. Other kind of questions, in contrast, are entirely correlative. In other words, I am making both a circumstantial case and a direct evidence case. The direct evidence is a much smaller case because there are fewer aspects of typology that I can link empirically than there are ones that I can't link empirically, that I have to use other kinds of questions. So what do I use as other kinds of questions? Well, it turns out that there are pretty strong value correlates. And new group, I'm evolving on this guy. I think he's an INFJ though. He's not an INTP because he's not a TI dump. Anyway, the point is, he's very meta-analyst. Regardless, I'm sorry to get distracted. I was talking to somebody in the chat.
No, this is fine.
So what was I saying? Fucking Eric.
Meta-analyst was the last word you said.
Okay. Well, the thing is, it's value question, right? So anyway, there are value correlates. So for example, some people, like my dad, he tends to frame everything through a utilitarian calculus, which is to say, well, why are you doing this, Eric? And the answer needs to be linked to some sort of outcome for him to really feel like he understands my motivations. For me to simply say it's fun or I like it is not adequate. He wants to know why I'm doing all this YouTube stuff. I say, well, you know, it does make some money. He's like, okay, well, I can understand. But if I would just tell him the real truth, which is I like talking a lot on the internet, then, well, what's the point of that, you know? Some people tend to frame things through a TE or outcome-based frame a lot, and some people tend to frame things through consistency or fairness-based frame a lot. Some people tend to frame things through a authenticity or some other frame like that. Some people tend to frame things through a lot through social grace, and
you could offer. You said it was your dad, right? You could offer them a comparative frame and ask him what he does for fun, right? Because if you're able to build that common ground, his answer may change. He may stop asking, you know, why is it you go on YouTube and make all these videos and stuff like that? Now you could come up with all these answers, right? If he's not going to understand it the same way, you might be able to offer that information and link that information through that concept. You might be able to say, oh, I know that you're into something as well. Oh, you've been watching that new TV show, right? Is that something you do for fun? Yes, it is. Well, what we're doing is sort of the same. And then, you know, you could build that context and then all of a sudden he would answer that question differently. He then, instead of asking that question, oh, why do you do this? You would go, oh, I know why you're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it makes a reasonable presumption there that a person's experiential link to an idea helps them to internalize the idea. It's more so true for some people than others. My father, he knows what he wants to do. He wants to watch football. The other night, I went in there and, hey, Dad, you want to watch football together? What's wrong with your TV? I said, why? Because he was in the middle of like answering an email or something. It's just how he is. It's like, okay, Dad, you know, I try to be the best son I can, and I get that you are a spicy meatball. But you know, he's great. He loves me. He loves Rachel. He's a great, caring person. He just has well, I mean, I would explain it by simply saying he's introverted intuition forward, which means he doesn't get that words persist over time carrying meanings with them, and he has a hard time understanding when a singular meaning is determinate. So, for example, he went to the doctor one time, and he came back and he was bothered by some sort of thing that went on between them that he didn't hear very well, because he didn't hear very well, and he wasn't sure what had happened. And he had this weird hypothesis that because he had called the nurse, he had referred to the nurse as a young lady, that they were Me Tooing him or something. He concluded one time that the neighbor boy must be playing pranks on us, because the gate had been opened at some point, and it was almost certainly my mom who was undergoing dementia. The boy next door was a college student at Berkeley, and he had this weird link story of having gotten a moving violation for a car for his license plate from Northern California, even though he hadn't been there. That somehow that had to do with this, and the neighbor boy was opening the gate. When the much more obvious explanation is my mom, who was at the time living here still and was undergoing increasing dementia, was probably doing uncharacteristic things. And so, it's like, but that's what it means to not have strong introverted intuition. I suspect that if I am right about my increasing inclination that you're probably an INFJ, then if you were to take this rat test, you'd do pretty well on it.
Let me cut in here. So you've identified an example where he's not using strong introverted intuition.
Right. No, that doesn't prove my rule. I'm not trying to prove anything to you about my dad. I'm telling you.
I know. But what I'm saying is that's what that perception is based on. You've gained a perception that his role would be a strong introverted intuitionist.
No, that's not true.
Based on that
that's not
scenario.
True. Look, the thing is, I get that that's a way to critique it, to assume that I'm self-fulfilling prophecy, to assume that I'm biased, that my own motivations are driven by my own interests. It's a perfectly reasonable conclusion to draw. In this case, it's totally false, and there are some particular reasons why it is. I am, after all.
Okay.
But listen, let me finish my sentence. I am,
I
after all.
What I want to say here, if that is not what you are doing, then if the label for that personality type is being assigned only to a scenario that is secluded from other things, then I don't quite know what information it's providing to the greater context.
I mean, well, I was trying to segue to a regular conversation at this point, because I understand that your approach is going to say, Eric, fundamentally, you're taking particularist experience and you're generalizing out from that and assuming that it represents a pattern. But that pattern is one you're creating and imposing upon a set of different realities, each of which presents as some sort of pattern, and you're mistakenly concluding there's a link between those patterns. I understand your argument. I'm telling you that it's reflective of you imposing your own frame of reference on me, but that's not something you're going to want to hear. It's,
No, I'm open to that critique as well. I mean, look, if I'm gonna sling it and say that's what you're doing, then I could only be open to the same bias. So that's fair.
But see, the thing is, this is why I was trying to segue to a regular conversation, because of course it may be true for you or it may not. I don't know. To me, it's both untrue and irrelevant. And part of the reason why, and this is important, is I've been a professional debate coach for a long time, and I was a debater in high school. I was a policy debater in high school, which means I have learned to be genuinely detached from all the positions I make, and genuinely attached to only those positions which consistently validate. Now, that's why I make very limited claims. I make sure my claims are sustainable. Now, I get that my personal experience and background is not a reason for you to affirm or negate anything, but I also get that my personal bias is not a reason to affirm or negate anything. The most biased person in the world can still be right.
So let me ask you this question. If we're talking about typology and we're going through all these questions and I'm critiquing it and you're defending it, etc., are you the only person that gains from that because within that framework you get to understand better, or is there value from that framework and from that conversation that you can provide me?
Well, all these conversations have benefited me and the model in general, because every time I'm subject to scrutiny, when people make successfully a good point against something I've said, in other words, when they say there's a contradiction here, or they point to examples that tend to falsify the rule or something like that, then I will adopt the new, stronger position. I'm not attached to any. And the thing is, this is my third attempt to understand and explain cognitive functions. The first 2 times I ran afoul of structural problems with the consistency of my understanding of it. I had to scrap them. This one actually does withstand scrutiny, and it's not just me saying that because it's me. Obviously, I do have an interest in the matter, but you got to understand that my number one interest in life, my primary goal, if you want to be concerned about my bias, is that I not be subject to critiques that I'm being subjective or biased. That I am, in fact, embracing always the strongest argument, even if it runs afoul of something I've said before. I will jettison the thing I said before and explain why I jettisoned it and why I adopted the new argument.
Sure, I can appreciate that as well.
So the thing is, over the course of the quote-unquote debate here, what you've said is that what the unstated things here have been the following: that if in fact Eric's claims about the empirics are not driven by bias, if in fact he's not simply having self-fulfilling prophecies where he's finding instances of people behaving consistently with the type he's afforded them and said, see, if in fact I'm not doing that, if in fact I'm doing the opposite, and what I'm saying is correct, then you wouldn't really have a response, because your response is that there's some fundamental Eric issue here that's preventing it from being correct, not that the things I'm saying are inherently wrong. Or if you want to point out something, you point out as no, I'm saying you said this, Eric, and that's wrong. Go ahead. I'm open to be corrected.
That's not what I'm doing. So I do want to ask this question again, because you said a lot of things, but you didn't actually answer this question. My question was, do you gain from having this discussion? You answered yes. Naturally, that's what the response is. My question was, do I gain anything from it? Is there any value from the system or from the discussion about that system that you can reflect on me as value that you think I might gain from it?
I mean, the reason I didn't answer the question, I guess, is indicative of my own default frame of reference. I assume it doesn't matter whether you that question, because I have no control over it. Is my assumption. It may be a false assumption, right? So it's like all I can do is get out the best ideas and learn whether they're the best or not. Whether or not you want to operate according to valuing the same kind of things that I value is beyond my control. I typically don't worry about what happens to things that I have already made or ideas I've already said or whatever. I assume that people are going to engage with them as they're going to engage with them. Some people are going to be seeking something that validates on level meh, in which case they're going to like my thing. Some people are going to be seeking something that validates on level meh, and they're maybe not going to like it. You know?
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm saying is that within its own frame of reference, and according to the mapping metrics that we normally use to determine whether something is an adequate approach to modeling, then I'm certainly the only one who's doing that. I provide fields, objects, vectors, directionality of information flow, things like that. So we could, in fact, simulate it on a computer. Remember, the map is not the territory. So it's never going to be the case that there are physical objects in our brain called cognitive functions.
Look, that's all fine. So I want to put forward 2 things here. As I'm asking you these questions about your system, right, you are also answering them in a particular way, and I am also benefiting from that the same way that you naturally benefit from the conversation.
That's up to you to decide. That's for you to decide.
And I'm prompting answers the same way that you are.
I'm not going to decide you benefit. You decide if you benefit. I don't decide that.
Exactly. But if we're both mutually participating in it, then we both, for the same naturalistic reasons, have that benefit to be gained. I'm going to be asking my questions and seeing how you react. You're going to be asking your questions and seeing how I react. There is some benefit to both of us in that sense. What I'm doing is taking the same approach you did. You came up with these different types of questions to approach people's personalities through these different scenarios, like the inky pinkies and all these other things that you're using. So my question was to create my own scenario here, which was to prompt you for whether or not you can provide intentional value. If you can provide intentional value that you can put forward about how the system works and how it benefits people, that would tell me something different about you, or to at least how you approach on this.
Can you explain what you mean by Can you explain what you mean by intentional value?
Sure. So again, we're both benefiting from the conversation in naturalistic ways, simply by having the conversation and testing.
Okay, I think I get it. You're saying if I were going to benefit from this, what would that look like? Okay, so
I'm specifically splitting that from the benefits that we would gain from naturally having a conversation.
Sure.
So just like I said, there was different answers to the question 2 + 2, right?
I understand that.
The answer could be 4, or it could be different things.
I understand.
So the intentional answer in that would be 4. That's the.
I understand now, and we'll answer the question.
Sure.
Okay, so the link between intentionality and value is obviously critically important to the question of an individual's valuing of something. So then you're saying basically, is what you're presenting valuable independently of people valuing it or not, is basically what I'm hearing you say. And the fact is, well, of course not. Of course not. Of course it's not independent of people valuing it. There's nothing that ever has value independent of people valuing it.
That's what my contention with that would be. I don't think value can exist independent of that. But
of course not.
There may be an expectation that you hold that.
But let's carry this out a little further, and we'll see where it goes. So it is the case that nothing has value outside of people valuing it. It's also the case that among people who value chopping trees, chainsaws are really useful.
Mm-hmm.
So among people who value understanding ontology in ways that allow them to place their own inherent frame biases within a metaframe of categorizing and cataloging frame biases, then for people who like that, to do that, then this is move up from a buck knife to a chainsaw, because it provides a way to a lexicon that says, let's evaluate how they're paying attention. And my claim is there are 4 kinds of ways of paying attention. Knowledge and deliberation, I've already made the distinction between. There's also action functions and interface functions. Now, I also can say this is a good way to model it, because it begins with the notion that there are 4 distinct fields upon which information interactions can occur. That is to say,
that's circular.
But you didn't. Okay, there's nothing circular about this at all.
No. So you just said my claim is that there are 4 ways to categorize these, and then you said it is good because there are 4 ways to do this. But that
no. There's a different 4, and it's good to categorize it as 4 ways because there are also 4 fields. And the reason that the 4 fields are specifically this, and this is one of those things that I would like for you to observationally challenge. It's an observation. It's not warranted by anything other than our observational experience. So you can see if, in fact, this observation withstands your scrutiny or not. The observation is as follows: that there's an external physical plane, place of objects where I can take physical action. There's an external metaphysical plane, a place where I can take word or meaning action, as we're doing right now. We're operating we're operating in a space that's not defined by space, but rather by the scope of the argumentation. Or we can also engage in having an internal physical plane, namely our own body can feel things. And
this is throwing a lot of jargon forward at the same time. I'm trying to keep up with it. Are you able to type those out?
I'm just saying, in your head, out your mouth, out your eyes, in your body. It's like you have an external world and an internal world, right? And both of them are divided into 2, which is to say, this conversation here, right, is occurring in some sort of field. If we're going to model what's happening right now, we have to account for where this event occurs. If we're going to model, remember, it's a conditional statement. If we're going to model this.
As you're going into this topic, I'm just letting you know following the conversation is difficult because the Discord call is not necessarily clear. You're speaking relatively quickly and you're going into a topic that uses a lot of very specific jargon.
Actually,
in order for me to
part
follow
uses
what
no
you're saying
specific
and to
jargon.
carry it along,
Actually, I have this thing I'm saying here.
So I can copy it.
The fields uses no specific jargon.
It.
But the fields thing, I'm just saying, it uses no specific jargon. I'm saying that this is not specific to typology at all. This is specific to any kind of modeling, okay? So
whether or not it's using jargon, there are other aspects in play. Just the pace in which you're talking,
okay,
and the
fine,
variety and complexity of the words you're using,
fine.
it is not easy to follow.
Fine. So what I'm saying is that if we were going to model this event, this experience of people interacting in this way, we'd have to establish a field on which it occurs. Now, again,
now, when you say field, do you mean a map or something else?
If we were going to model this, let's say we're going to try to simulate this thing where we simulate you, we simulate me, and the simulated people end up actually engaging in some way that's similar to how we actually engage. Okay, so a simulation is a good way to test whether your model is on something or not, right? If you're simulating that fish do this because they love the smell of flowers, and you put a bunch of flowers in the water and they don't change, then your explanation as to the motivations is wrong, or your explanation as to what drives the behaviors is wrong. So in this instance, what we're trying to say is, well, like, how do we explain this event or model it in such a way that if we were to simulate the participants in it, then we could do that? Well, just to even be able to simulate the participants in it, we need to establish where this event is occurring. And it's not occurring anywhere in the physical world. And it's not an event that's made up of us taking real physical actions. We're taking meaning-based actions. We're using words instead. So it's to establish a place for this to occur, we establish something called an external metaphysical field. It's like a library, the internet, okay? That's a different field for the purpose of modeling than digging a hole in the yard, which requires me to engage with the external physical field. It's a different placement than when I have a stomach ache. That experience has to be placed someplace too. And it's not specific to the physical location of the world. It's specific to the physical location of my body. Wherever I go, that's where the stomach ache is.
Sorry, were you saying that fits into one of those categories? Is it physical, metaphysical, or are you saying that fits into a third category?
Well, what I'm basically saying is, let's pretend that it was you who wanted to model this sort of thing. I'm saying what we need to do before we could even begin going any further is figure out what things we have to have at minimum to make a model work. We need to have a field that accounts for stomach ache. We need to have a field that accounts for this conversation. We need to have a field that accounts for digging a hole in the yard. And we need to have a field that accounts for me thinking things in my head and not saying them out loud too. So what I'm saying is, if we were going to model this correctly, personality or whatever you want to call it, then we'd have to start with those kind of questions. My critique about typology in general, not my own approach to it, but critique about typology in general, is they're not doing anything of the sort. There's no kind of genuine...
Who's they?
The rest of the typology community, C.S. Joseph, Dave Superpowers, everybody else who's making typology videos I can think of is at least somewhat guilty of this, which is to say, they haven't said to themselves, okay, if I'm doing something real, then how would we test that? And if we were to test it like that, what would we need to do? I've done that, and that's why I said, well, in order to accurately model this, we're going to have fields, objects, and vectors, because that's the kind of thing that models require. And so when I critique typology, I critique it for failing to even attempt to uphold a legitimate standard. But the thing is, I am ready to say, I was ready. I mean, at this point, it's really hard for me to be swayed that cognitive functions don't explain better than any alternative, for sure. But for a long time, I was very ready to nix the notion. I originally thought it was probably just all bullshit anyway, especially when I ran afoul of people who didn't do the legwork necessary to establish this thing and presented stuff that was clearly not making a distinction between metaphor and stuff that was not metaphor. And it's like you get a bunch of stuff in typology that's all about your demon function or whatever. That stuff is what causes people to not respect it, because that's not. If you can't tell which parts of your things are correlates, which parts of your things are metaphors, and which parts of your things are skills tests, then obviously you're not going to be doing a very good job of explaining anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not guilty of any of those things. I mean, you could invalidate what I'm attempting to do entirely as a thing. You can say, look, putting people in boxes is always wrong, blah, 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 or it's always going to be just blurry around the edges. It's just a map, so we're going to validate it on its inherent map qualities, or something like that. But if you are serious about your critique, and it sounds like you are, then your critique is based on the fact that typology in general does a terrible fucking job.
I'm trying to figure out why it does a terrible job.
Because the people who've done the ideating about it have either been, rough ENTPs or some other types or whatever. But the point is, the reason that it hadn't been done properly before me is because a fully trained thinker hasn't approached the question before. I'm a debate coach. That means my job is to make sure that the cases I make withstand scrutiny. And I am accustomed to arguing arguments that I know are wrong, but can win the argument chain because of structural reasons or something. And I'm able to distinguish between those ones and the ones that are actually correct, even if they're harder to explain. I'm very practiced in this. Plus, I asked the right questions, at least the third time I asked the right questions before I started. What would this look like if it weren't bullshit?
Well said.
So I can't figure out whether or not, because you were talking about all these like simulations and metrics and all these types of things that you would theoretically use if it was working the correct way. I could summarize all of that to ask whether or not you are trying to make predictions with it.
I mean, and that's the ultimate thing is, I enjoy these kind of conversations. Usually, I don't love arguing cognitive functions in general because of this phenomenon happens with us. People come in with a lot of probably legitimate critiques of typology, but not drawing distinctions between my approach and the approach that they encounter literally everywhere else. So, the thing is, I feel like I'm not responding to what you said. What did you say again?
From all of the explanation you get, okay, I'm going to go back just one extra step here to give it a little bit more context. I asked if there was value that you could provide in it. I had a few thoughts along the way of the way that you explained that. You said specifically, I'm going to stop. I'm going to re-explain what I said because I asked for you to do that, and you said, "Yeah, I can do this again." You gave me a pretty clear distinction, like start to end, of what you were trying to accomplish and how you were doing that. And that to me involved building some sort of map or network.
Oh, right. I remember. I remember. Basically, no, I'm not interested in doing any of that work. I'm the guy who came up with the plate tectonics, or at least the person who figured out, oh, this is how plate tectonics work. And 50 years later, somebody else will do the empirics. I don't give a fuck. The thing is, I genuinely don't give a fuck. It's not my problem whether people have a good philosophical understanding or not, or working philosophical understanding. I don't think the existing explanations of human behavior, by and large, explain personality. I certainly don't think the Big Five even attempts to explain personality. It simply uses a metaphor that people have attributes that are, in fact, statuses conferred upon them by others. But, so I think given the alternatives, cognitive function certainly works well for me, if for no other reason than in terms of taxonomy argumentation. So it turns out that I can easily enough break all of argumentation into 8 implicit values, just like cognitive functions. They'll all fall under one of those things, basically. The only argument that doesn't, it seems to, is our faith-based behavior arguments. So those don't fall under that. But argumentationally, it turns out that people usually in debate argue from a TI frame, that's say what's logically consistent. Sometimes in debate argue from a TE frame, that's what's useful. But often in debate, we'll also argue from an FE frame in terms of what's most consistent with the broad understanding. And there are certain frames that rarely get argued in debate, such as, well, I personally don't feel good about this, or like Trump's frame of reference is talk is cheap. Let's just take a bunch of action, kick the anthill. These sort of cognitive functions provides a meaningful way to frame any argument you hear, regardless of whether it's meaningful about human beings. It certainly is meaningful about how they communicate. And I have a document actually that this is sort of a non-controversial way for us to find common ground about typology. Is I think you'd enjoy looking at this maybe. So relativism. Conjugate function bridge. Is it? Yeah, that's it. Okay, so it's it really starts on page 5 of this, and it goes through page this. Well, to the top of page 9, and it's not solid text. I mean, it's like it's formatted. So anyway, this is possibly a good strategy for me, and this is where I need to have the most improvement in strategizing, so that I find ways in which people can, like you said, find utility in it, find value in it, prioritize how other people find value in it, rather than just wiping my hands of the question entirely. Right? There are areas of more commonality between people where they can agree while avoiding the controversial labels of, like, okay, well, this is MBTI. Well, no, this is not MBTI. What I'm sharing with you there. That's just an analysis of how these frames play out in debate without referencing cognitive functions or MBTI at all. So it's like I need to take advantage of the fact that I've done all these pieces of work and find the ones that are most comfortably conform common ground, where there's not any reason or need to dispute things, and then work from there, you know?
Mm-hmm. Okay, well,
I'm going to take a look at it right now. I'm just putting
this is just an observation I've made, right? You said you gave the tectonics example earlier because someone had theorized it at some point, 50 years prior, and then far later in the future, someone was able to prove it, and then it became valuable to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So the only way that was possible and made possible by those previous scientists that made those sort of strange theoretical conclusions to begin with before it was proven was by finding a way to carry that information forward and to show how it was potentially valuable. If they didn't do that, it would have never been carried forward and it would never be proven as useful.
All right. Well, I'm only 5,300 videos into it, but I am working on getting my ideas out there. So
the next thing I would say is you have a system that is valuable to you because at least it sounds like you use it for your own benefit to a degree. It sounds like you benefit from asking these questions and then clarifying someone's position and then applying that label to it and saying, now I understand you better and this definitely works for me. And that is fine. But I would also say that many people do that. They just don't express it as a methodological framework the same way that you do. They don't call it, oh, this is typology. They might just have this idea in their head without calling it something specific.
So in that case, they're expressing their own sort of intuitive experience and understanding of life as they move through it, and that's fine. I'm explicitly saying I'm making a model. I'm doing something that's model. You know, it's modeling something specific. And you're saying, well, but if you want that to actually like that to be treated as such, you need to approach it in the same way. And I say, well, I am approaching it in that way. And you say, well, then why are you, like, then you need to, well, I mean, I at some point I do have to wash my hands of doing other people's work for them. It's like, I'm not saying that the cognitive function approach to understanding things is necessarily good for everybody. I'm saying that some people, they prefer to go on a drive with no map and just discover where they discover. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm saying that if we are going to make a map, then for people who are map-oriented people who want the map to be accurate, we ought to care about its accuracy and whether or not we're adhering to how maps are made.
Do you care more about the accuracy of mapping systems, or do you care more about typology? If you had to choose one to specialize in.
I mean, I've been specializing in mapping systems for ages, so obviously that. I mean, because that's the larger frame of reference, obviously. But
that's what I would expect.
But the thing is, it's difficult, in fact, to once you incorporate this, even if you just want to call it a taxonomical tool, it's difficult to go back because you realize things like, it's when I go into the coffee shop in Arizona, and there's this very nice young lady there who is supposed to add 10% to my bill as a tip because I'm getting takeout, okay? And what she has done instead is doubled my bill and then added 10%. And I'm trying to explain this to her, and she's really struggling with the explanation. But she's super nice, and she's super concerned about how she's appearing. Now, in the past, I may or may not have noticed those things. I'm fairly self-absorbed. But because of my talking about cognitive functions a lot, I noticed it as, number one, she was struggling with the TI issue. Number two, she took a TE approach to answering it, which is to say, even though it was the middle of the night, it was like 3 a.m, she called her manager and kept calling her until she woke up so that her manager could tell her what the answer was, even though I was trying to explain to her right in front of her, which means, and my explanation was not difficult, right? Which means she doesn't trust herself to deliberate out about those questions. She much more trusts herself to correctly know that she's in line with somebody else's expectations of her.
Hold on.
And so
doesn't trust.
No, I'm not making any claims about type or cognitive functions at all. I'm saying that because of cognitive functions,
doesn't trust herself or didn't trust herself in that scenario.
Didn't trust herself in that scenario. I'm using present tense to give it a bit more of an active feel in the storytelling.
That's why I made the distinction. Thank you.
Okay. She didn't in that context, and so the thing is, prior to understanding people's behavior through a cognitive function frame, I would have just been mostly annoyed. I wouldn't have taken into account things like, maybe it's important to this person how they appear a lot, or maybe it's not important to this person how they appear a lot. I wouldn't have even considered those things necessarily. Having a shorthand way of categorizing people's apparent behaviors or apparent displays of subjective data that we can only interpret, we can't really get to ourselves. Like I can't feel your sadness. I can only conclude that you look sad. Those frames of reference, there are a lot of frames of reference that I just didn't consider as possibilities simply because I was imposing my own experience on everybody reflexively. Just assumed everybody was by default like me, and cognitive functions allowed me to understand a way to taxonomy the differences in terms of both values and skills and correlate behaviors. Whether or not that is an accurate thing about In other words, whether or not that means we should use personality typing or not, I don't know. But what I'm telling you is that one advantage of personality typing over, say, the Big Five is the Big Five makes fundamentally normative claims, whether it says it does or not. If you have low consciousness, that's bad. If you have low agreeableness, that's bad. If low openness, that's bad. And it then tells you personality is defined as those aspects of self that remain the same throughout your life. So you suck and you're stuck with it. That's what Big Five tells you, But the personality typology says try to understand when somebody's behaving dramatically differently from you. Try to understand what that tells you about their frame of reference in that moment, at least, and how it might. And here's some information about frames of reference that might not be reflexively or intuitively prioritized or understood by you. And so it's a very egalitarian and just way of doing things, in the sense that if you understand personality through this frame of reference, then you recognize your own strengths as the inherent consequence of something else that's given up. That if I'm paying attention at this all right now, then I'm not also watching a football game. Like, for example, conscientiousness. Let's talk a little bit more about conscientiousness.
My criticism when you were asking the questions was, and it seems that it's falling into the same trap that you just described. You said Big Five fails because it asks these questions and it says, if you're low in these categories, it's bad because X, Y, Z. You have these examples. Let's say, for example,
it's bad. I didn't say it fails because, I said it's bad because.
Right. What I'm saying is the questions that you asked me had right and wrong answers, and it seems to fall into the same trap. If I give you a wrong answer, it shows that I am not in that frame of mind and I failed to gain these benefits.
All right, so let me respond to that specifically with this. I'm constantly making these videos, and I'm constantly talking all the time, and I have a lot of stuff up, but it's not very well organized, and I don't really know what I already have done. My Google Docs is so full of half-finished documents and whatever. The thing is,
sure,
Big Five would tell me I have low conscientiousness, but I would point out if I had high consciousness, if I spent my time organizing what I've already made, then I would not be spending my time making new things. So now it might be ideal that one balances those two factors, right? But the thing is, it assumes that there's no exclusivity. It is, in fact, though, the case that when I'm playing, I'm not cleaning up. So it's a normative aspect to it, in the sense that it says conscientiousness is low, without acknowledging that maybe that's because he's there's a link here. In other words, how productive and creative and how much of a mess you make is linked to how clean you keep things. So it kind of pretends it's not.
Again, my critique here is that the new system that you are using falls to the same error.
But it doesn't.
The error that you described in Big Five.
No, it doesn't. Though. I just demonstrated how it doesn't. So, in other words, because Big Five says you can be both conscientious and open.
Right. Let me reframe this, because I have a better way of framing it. You said that you can effectively disagree with the criteria of the Big Five. You can say that being low in openness is not a bad thing, because you can still achieve all these different new results by veering from that standard.
I'm actually not even saying that. I'm simply saying that Big Five, whether it wants to or not, makes normative claims, namely that certain aspects of personality are good and certain aspects of personality are bad, regardless of the fact whether those personality aspects link to any actual moral question. So it's like there are people who can't do logic questions. It's Greek to them. Now, you have psychology addresses these people in a variety of ways. IQ score, for example, or to say maybe they have very high conscientiousness, so they're not really ideating anything new. Or I don't know how I would explain it. The point is, I would say, okay, so if they're never paying attention like that, to the logic of what's being said, what are they paying attention to instead? It seems like a better, certainly a more operationalized means of addressing the question, right?
What benefit does the framework provide? I can ask questions, but I can ask them outside of a framework. Like I could simply ask you the inky pinky question outside the framework of typology. I could just ask it to you and then use that as its own standalone test. Why is it that you rely on a framework at all instead of asking these questions individually?
It's okay. Let me start by answering with a bit of by making sure I answer this as well as possible. Any verbalized argument carries with it the frame that can be inferred from the argument. For example, if I say we should exercise to keep our hearts healthy, one implicit frame, a set of facts the statement presupposes are not in any dispute, is that maintaining heart health is good. The above statement uses numbers 6 and 3 as an implicit frame, and the numbers are below. Preventing harm is good. Once it's established that harm is prevented, its value is not questioned. That there are reasons linked to studies or data, or that such information is more reliable than personal experience in determining matters of one's own body is another implicit frame. We can break down every argument as an example of one or more of these implicit frames or values. So it's not the case that you can ask questions without a frame, because the frame is you're getting information. And getting information means you expect the words that you receive to have absolute meaning contextually. I'd say to affirm under 5, relative absolutism. So the thing is, to answer this question in full, I am going to have to actually do something that I hate to do, which is instead of just directly answering it, I'm going to ask you to look at the answer that this document is. In some sense, although I didn't literally, in some sense, in opening this, I anticipated the question, or maybe I opened it in response to the question. I don't remember. But regardless, it's true. A question is not a statement. So a statement necessarily has an implied frame. Questions don't necessarily have implied frames, but it doesn't mean that asking questions and receiving answers doesn't provide data, and that data can be framed in multiple ways after the fact. And in fact, you can evaluate it as potentially meaning 6 different things, some of which are compatible with each other, and some of which are exclusive of each other, and some of which are inversely proportional, and lots of things like that, right? Why am I getting a phone call? Who's calling me? I hung up. I guess I didn't get to the phone fast enough. Let's see who it was.
Thank you for calling Auto Warranty Services. To opt out from
Auto Warranty Services. I didn't have a warranty on my auto. I know you guys are lying to me when you say you have an urgent message for me about my auto warranty, because I don't have an auto warranty. So that message cannot possibly be very urgent. I bought that car with no warranty. It's like I wanted the most recent year I could afford, and I said, okay, well, let's get this one because we can afford
it. I kind of want to reframe my question a little bit here, specifically saying that all I'm going for is like a reflex response. What?
I mean, the thing is, gaming is a serious question and matter in typology for sure. Typing somebody who has no idea anything about typology, you're going to get a different approach to the questions than typing somebody who has a great deal of knowledge about typology. In those instances, I end up defaulting to a more subjectively justified answer, but probably equally correct. to some extent, you can see how my experience with a lot of different types and how they engage with the subject of typology is revelatory to me. I wouldn't say that that's justification that's going to withstand scrutiny externally, but because it relies on subjective data points that you have to trust me about. It's not like I can say, well, here's the evidence. I'm not going to do the work, but you do the evidence. That's one thing. But I'm saying when I'm saying that in this case it's not a justification I use to make explicitly, but it is true that somebody who's a meta-analyst is likely to deal very much more with typology as you and I currently are than somebody who is an analyst. And these expressions, these terms I use, it refers to INFJs, ENTPs, INTPs, and ENFJs are meta-analysts, which is to say, in my understanding of things, and disputed it as you wish, but the two most metaphysical types are INFJ and ENTP, in that they begin with three ways of paying attention that link to communication rather than experience. And that there are two types as well that foremost in three attentional ways link to experience, and then lastly, communication. So there's both ends of the spectrum. Well, I think you are probably an INFJ, which would explain why you keep dealing with this thing on the framework level. Meta-analysts do that. They want, especially INTPs, ENTPs, INFJs especially, those three types, very much like to say, okay, well, let's challenge the frame of reference itself here and see if we even need to argue on the case level at all. Most people default to a case level argumentation. Most people are subject to frame walking. So I can say something that implies certain frames and they'll just walk along with it, and all of a sudden they're in your frame and you're arguing on your field, right? Whereas there's certain types of people that insist on controlling the frame, and yet others who are willing to actually engage on the frame. The fact that you and I are actually engaging on the frame suggests you're probably INFJ to me. Now, granted, you don't have to care about that at all. That's fine. I don't want to argue. It's like I'm trying to be like not so fighty.
That's fine. So, I had one small critique with what was said there, in some sense. Where was this? You would say that people of a certain type would meet you on like a framework level, but it could be like preconceptions that cause that. It could be external values. It could be things on the receiving end of your questions that change.
Sure. I mean, in every display of data, there will be outliers. So, for example, when I was dating this girl, Kimberly, and she was not a healthy person, really. She had this thing she did where she tried to rewrite my history so that my parents were abusive in some fashion. And I was just like, hey, I told you better stop that. I don't want to hear any of that shit. I don't like it. I don't have any other reason than that. I just don't like it. You better stop. Now, if I were to have been typing me at that time, I would have said, it's definitely FI. It's totally FI. Because listen to him. He's saying, you've crossed a boundary. This is an arbitrary boundary, but it's mine, and I'm going to demand that you respect it. And that's textbook introverted feeling. The thing is, the nice thing about a human lifetime is it's segmented into neat things called days. We have lots of examples of them. That sticks out in my memory, and it stuck out in my attention at the moment. I said, oh my God, this is FI, because I'm FI polar. This is what people do to me all the time. They cross their arms, they stomp their foot, and they say, I don't have a reason, I just want you to stop. I don't like what you're saying. I don't like your words. You just stop. I don't have any reason. I don't need a reason. I don't like the way you make me feel. And I'm like, oh shit. I do that too sometimes. Oh, I do. That's not disproving what I'm saying. It's proving what I'm saying.
So for each of these examples and each of these scenarios, right, you have a perception that is, oh yes, that matches me. I am like that. But you have an entire lifetime of history and an entire future of events and scenarios that you're going to go through that may differ from that. And you said there may be outliers, right? But that's where this value claim comes from at all. To say it bears any resemblance to anything in reality would need to say there is some sort of natural pattern here.
Well, okay. So, sure, it would make the claim that, okay, well, if what you're saying has any validity at all, you'd have to be able to go back to before you even knew about typology, Eric, and you have to provide an example of how you default to a TI style response or a logical or legal kind of response.
No. Not just every, right?
No, but I just said why it's not every, right? So the fact is, if in fact I'm an extroverted intuition, Dom, it doesn't mean that I'm always using extroverted intuition as a manner of paying attention. It instead means that I will sometimes use meow, and it'll be at approximately the following ratio. And that's something we can actually look at over time and see if you're objective. Now, you might claim you can't do that to yourself because you're too close to the situation. That's fine. That's fair to you. I don't care. I'm not trying to justify. I'm not trying to justify anything with my own personal experience.
Let me just take that example and carry
it can be done. Is my point.
Let me just carry your same example one step further, right? Let's say that was the reaction you had. So you've described a scenario where like an emotional reaction breaks out. You say, "This is what I'm telling you. I don't need a reason for it. This is just how it is." Right? So that's the type of reaction you may have to a scenario. And then you might begin looking for that pattern, and you might say, these are the examples where I have taken this example, right? But there could be other scenarios where you fall into the opportunity to use that, but you don't revert to that, and then it would never be in that count. So there might be 10 other examples that same day where that could have come up that you didn't utilize it.
Okay. Well, sure. I mean, but that doesn't change the fact that if I take say random sample of days, and I discover that looking at a random sample of days, one of the days you see me and I'm watching a lot of movies. One of the days you see me and I'm making a lot of videos. Now, typology, I would argue that on one of those days I'm attending via a receive function, and when I'm sitting back and I'm receiving. And in another, I'm attending via a put function. I'm saying things. When I'm talking to you, I'm attending by a put and a get function. So when you ask me questions, you're getting information from me. When I ask you questions, I'm getting information from you. So those sort of like basic, forget about cognitive functions. Let's just talk about statements, commands, and questions and linguistics for a second. It's like, and on the one hand, a statement is an ascription of belief to something. On the other hand, a command is an expectation of outcomes. On the third hand, a question is an expectation of receiving information, getting information from the person. So you would see, in fact, if you looked at month after month after month of my life, you would see that I go through weeks of, in my current capacity, of putting in lots of information, videos and stuff. And then about a week or two of much reduced activity and what you don't see is me sitting here where I'm watching TV and stuff. But the thing is, it's not always been the case that I've been that productive. It used to be the case that I still spent maybe the same amount of time watching TV, but the rest of the time I wasn't really making shit. I was chatting with people in ways that didn't produce objects like this video. But now I still doing the same things. It's just I've managed to kill two birds with one stone. You'll notice that any reasonable person critiquing this channel will say you're set up to fail, for example, or you are doomed because look at this mess. Why is it like this, Eric? Why don't you use your green screen? Why do they say things like this, right? Because I'm still doing the same thing I always was doing. I just figured out how to kill an extra bird now.
So this goes back to the questions you asked me before, right? What I brought up specifically when I was describing my critique of the questions you're asking was whether someone had the capacity to answer the question the way that you're expecting it to. When you're describing a shift in personality between when you are able to be productive and when you're not able to be productive, I could make the argument that when you are trying to be productive but unsuccessful, you are still in the productive mindset, so that would still match your personality. If you said, I want to make videos, but I don't have the know-how, I don't have the technology, I don't have the confidence, anything like that, right? You may be still in that productive mindset where you say, man, I really wish I could do that, and that is definitely what I assign my personality to, but I can't do it right now. So to say that I'm productive would be a lie.
Okay, so let's then get down to another way that we can empirically validate this, which is the notion of some sort of physical core. So the brain scan thing is not a terrible idea, and it's not a terrible idea because Ssuartscire, at least, bases its whole idea on the physical concept, the physical reality of locality suppression, which is to say, when one part of the brain lights up, surrounding parts in the immediate vicinity light down. And so that's one sort of thing. And it is also the case that brain activity occurs in certain distinct places and patterns. And in theory, one could attach NIAS to your temples and walk around with it all day and a couple of days, and you could measure and see, are there some people who spend almost all day with their brain lighting up like this, and this percentage of the day with the brain lighting up like this, and this percentage of the brain lighting up like this, and this percentage like this, or is that not the case? You know, if it is the case that they do that day after day, if you take sample days from age meow, age meow, age meow, and age meow, you could establish it pretty definitively that in fact those lighting up patterns don't change over the course of a person's life in broad terms, in terms of their ratios to each other. And that's the thing. To the extent that I'm always, if I am in fact overusing this TI frame, let's say, I'm always trying to hold everything accountable to my rationality frame of reference. Well, that would be consistent with brain lighting up in a TI way more than its fair share of the time. That there's a necessary deficit that goes along with that. And that would mean that the part of my brain that lights up that says how I feel about things only lights up occasionally.
So that does actually answer something, because I was asking about whether or not those questions would be answered circumstantially in different ways. And you were suggesting that the brain scans would show what those circumstances are, if any. Because you might give the same response or different answers, etc., but the brain scan would give a second layer of data that would basically prove some of the circumstantiality.
I would also say that another thing you could falsify with it would be you'd expect if a person was compelled to use an intentional manner that they didn't use very often, that they would try to get away from that situation quickly. So you wouldn't see an extended periods of people in, like for me, you wouldn't see extended periods of FI. You'd see little blasts of it here and there. And it would be responsive to moments in TV shows and stuff. But that's how I feel things. I feel mad in this moment. 5 seconds later, I feel back to neutral again or something, you know? So I forgot where I was going with that. Because I saw 70s Dance Hall and I thought, I want to go to 70s Dance Hall. I want to dance with, actually I want to go 80s Dance Hall. I want to dance with Falco in 1985. I want to go back to 1985 and go clubbing with Falco and do a bunch of cocaine and dance with him in front of police cars in a suit.
Sir, I guess this would be my hesitation with like using the brain scans, right? You said the criticism of like the big five typology would be that you could be, for example, you might be low in openness, but still achieving all these things through what openness doesn't provide, because you would be taking an alternative route to generate, productivity. This is because another variable exists that isn't accounted for within that framework. So what my hesitation with like the brain scans would be is that even if you have a part of your brain that lights up with like all these things that are, let's say they have like a negative connotation to them, right? there could be one little switch or one little variable in one little neuron somewhere that basically flips that action on its head, that says, no, I'm actually doing this for the right reason, and all of it's justified. Okay, so well, it's going to be very, very difficult to ascertain.
Well, that's why I said you'd have to look at, if you were going to use that approach, you'd have to take samples of day meow to age meow, day meow to age meow, day meow, day meow. You have to take a lot of samples across time to establish it clearly. Or at least, you know, even if you were to give them 2 weeks, it could be the worst 2 weeks of their life, and they could be expressing their identity in ways that are not comfortable for them. The thing is, there are ways that we express our identity that are comfortable, and we can see the physical correlates hand in this. You wouldn't say that if I said, if the Big Five said, well, you score high in rightedness, but you score extremely low in leftedness, you know, then, and it treated them as unlinked, then we'd laugh at it, you know? It seems to me,
if this technology is developed, right, and people are using brain scans to, you know, get day in day out samples, day-to-day life, and all these different decisions they make in all these different contexts using it, that will be this huge data set that will be enormously useful for a number of things. That will be effectively its own map, because it will make all these suggestions, and then you would be attempting to apply typology to that to see if it matches those criteria.
Oh,
would it not make?
Hold on, I'm making a hypothetical prediction here. And so, in other words, I'm saying if my understanding of it is correct, the data will look like this. That's how it works. Intuition first, data after. So, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing at all. That's not the case. What you're saying at all. Now, you might be saying once you have the brain scan data, you might be saying once you have the brain scan data, you no longer need the theoretical.
No, that's not what I said either. Okay. The theory part of it does make sense to me, and there is a value in it. What I'm suggesting is, wouldn't it be more valuable to start with it after the brain scan data is available? Because then you would have a better idea of what you could compare it to.
Yeah, that would be smart. If I were outcome oriented, I'd do that probably. Unfortunately, I am an intuitive who likes to play all the time. And I've always been that before I even knew about cognitive functions and typology in my memory, in my opinion about my own self. But also, like I said, I could put this video, link to this video of me when I'm 17 years old. You can see me. This is well before I ever heard of MBTI. I couldn't be self-fulfilling some prophecy back in time. I didn't even remember the video until somebody shared it with me on Facebook like a few years ago.
Well, would your understanding of like the colloquial sense of value be tied to outcome-based orientations?
No.
Really?
It's countervalued, in fact. I did a video called 6-slot TE, Captain Fiasco. As soon as something becomes useful to me, this has always been my struggle. It wasn't until cognitive functions that I had some sort of way of understanding it. As soon as something becomes useful for me, I don't want to do it anymore. I could be enjoying the living shit out of whatever it is. You try to pay me $5 to do it, I don't want to do it anymore. It's not.
But you said you do get paid for it earlier.
I mean, I do. Yeah, no, I do get paid for it. But I'm saying, you know, as work goes, it's not bad. I'm not saying I am unable to work. I'm just saying that
it's still good. That's fine.
And that even when there are things that are low-hanging fruit, utilitarian-wise, I don't pick them. Like, it would be easy enough for me to, instead of live streaming another 3-hour live stream and having this wonderful, very entertaining and engaging conversation, if I had just made, 10 6-minute long typology videos, which I could do in an hour, easy enough, just rip them off, and just I don't mean rip them off like steel, I mean like just, bust them out, then that would be much more beneficial to my channel. But it's very rare that I actually manage to muster the utilitarian verve to accomplish that.
Okay, so this is what I would suggest. You would suggest from what I gather from what you said it is counterintuitive to teach people these things, and you gave the example earlier of object impermanence in infants and stuff like that, where you go peekaboo, and because they don't fully understand the situation, it creates this surprise mechanism, and they get all excited by it. It's this fun, happy time, right? the way that I would relate that to the approach that you're taking here is a very similar thing where metaphysical object permanence is what you would gain through an understanding of like orders ontology. And if you refrain from teaching people that, you'll be able to continue.
That's shape constancy.
So
that's shape constancy.
So what I would suggest based on that
there's
is
that.
that
I have that already. It's shape constancy. There's a thing. There's an equivalent. Okay. So look, I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you.
What I would suggest is that self-actualization, at least a value goal that people could try to aim for, would be to understand both object permanence and metaphysical object permanence. And the goal that I would suggest you should try to teach is both of them, because self-actualization would be a result of that. Because what you will learn from those is probably more valuable through the actualization than what you would gain from the surprise of not having it.
So you think we should prioritize knowledge?
Yes.
Shocking. My girlfriend's a knower too. The thing is, yeah, you just demonstrated what I would expect from an INFJ. Of course, you think if you yourself, you believe if I myself knew more fully and well from my own personal experience, since I naturally know so well the universal, boy, I'd really be a more effective knower. But I'm not a knower. I'm an action type. So if I were a knower, I wouldn't be sitting here going, yeah, I want to abruptly, out of nowhere, talk to a stranger I've never met before for 2 hours and a half. But I am an action type, so I'm not a knower. I don't proceed into things with full knowledge at all. I proceed into things assuming I'm going to improvise on the fly and figure it out as I go. And sometimes that serves me poorly, and sometimes it serves me well. But it is my identity and my nature, and it's always been. And you and I get along well because knowers because I mean this is the golden pair. The thing is, you came in very unusual in that you're an INFJ who came in willing to argue and willing to endure some of my bad social graces, which can be abrasive sometimes, and yet here we are having a wonderful conversation about things. And I'd like to think that you're enjoying it as much as I am. Well,
I am enjoying it, yeah.
I'm going out with somebody who's just like you, because ENTPs and INFJs get along great.
It's magical.
It's great. It's because it's like neither of us really experiences other types who are able to engage in all the metaphysical subtext, who prioritize statuses and communication as much, and who are also as careful about who have the same kind of relation or have a complementary relationship and caring about what other people think. So you don't really care about what other people think. You care more about actually being correct. I don't actually care about being correct. I care more about what other people think. But I'm better at being correct, and you're better at managing what other people think.
Facts. Very well said. If I may say so.
And that's now. These are boxes I'm putting us both in. True. I bet you that if you'll allow the generalist patterns to be what they are and not demand that they be universally applicable in every specific instance, then I think you'll find that you probably fit in these boxes pretty well. Because remember, you're in the most unique box of all. You're INFJ, which is like, I mean, you're not designed to functionally engage with a world that often is deaf to a lot of the complexity of what you're talking about, and is often like oafish in its own lack of intuition.
You're offering two different things here. You're appealing to like the uniqueness of the class, but then you're also indicating that I care about what's right and not about what's like affable. So
I'm saying
those two things
I'm saying multiple things. I'm not making. I am making claims, but I'm not making arguments at the moment.
You are saying multiple things, and I'm insisting that a couple of those things are at odds with each other. So what you are saying in total is not the final message, I would assume.
Yeah, I mean, right at this point, I'm saying these are things I believe about INFJs as statements that generally withstand scrutiny about as descriptors of how they typically are. Whether or not, but of course, not identifying with that descriptor, it does not falsify the type at all. If a person fails to identify with shit tons of descriptors, then it's a good indication perhaps that they're the wrong type. But ultimately, until we understand and until the rest of the typology community accepts that sometimes we have to trust the data even when it runs afoul of our expectations. So like I might expect most INFJs to not really want to argue the TI with me as much as you, but that's not what makes somebody an INFJ or not.
So I asked the question earlier. I still don't really have a holistic answer on this one. You took it like a bit of a long route to get there. When I am trying to gather details about someone's personality or someone's approach to things or anything in their life, I will ask them in the most sort of direct English that I can, and I will have a system that I'm using. It's definitely not a typology system, but I will have a method in my head to where that relates to things in my life in order to gain that context. So what I would suggest, and I'm looking for how you would argue this differently using a system. If I'm only relating things to my personal experience rather than using an external system like a typology, I feel like I would be gaining the value that I would be seeking to gain. Whereas if I use that method, that external system, I would only be answering for that system, and I wouldn't actually gain the value that I'm seeking.
So what makes the system you're using in this hypothesis exclusive of a cognitive function or attentional manner taxonomical approach and nothing else?
I just explained what it was. It was a comparison of my experiences to theirs.
But what makes that exclusive of a typological understanding? In other words, why can't I keep both those pieces of, why can't I run it through both machines and look at both the results?
You could. I'm asking it. Let's say I run it through the experiential one first. What other data is the method going to provide that the experiential one doesn't?
I mean, I guess it would depend on what kind of data you feel comfortable operating under. It's like if I mostly feel comfortable using my gut and my feelings and stuff, then it's probably not going to be providing much utility at all. It's going to indeed remove you from that which provides you the best guidance, probably. I'm not advocating it as a normative good for people to adopt this. You know, I'm saying, oh, people want to scrutinize my map making technique? Okay, I'm ready to defend it. I'm very self-absorbed in that fashion. I mean, I guess in that way, I'm projecting onto everybody the assumption that they too prioritize their own deliberative assessment over other ways of shortcutting that. Because you can shortcut. You could determine this guy's an expert, I'm going to trust him. You could say, well, this is a popular opinion, I'm going to go with that. You could say, well, this is what's in my best interest, I'm going to go with that. You know, there are other ways you could approach the matter. Alan Bryan says INFJs need to liberate themselves from the need to control. I think INFJs need an environment that doesn't require the INFJ to control anybody, that allows the INFJ to communicate without attempting to seize any of the other person's agency. I'd like to believe that I provide that environment for Rachel, that I'm proactive in my own, like, basically neither Rachel nor I is comfortable getting out intuited by the other, which is to say, I hate it when I miss a cue.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes us very careful.
Yeah.
We've been having basically our version of a raging fight the last 3 days. There hasn't been a harsh word spoken between us. Would you say that's true, Rachel? Yeah, it's totally true.
It is true. It's just me.
We just both have been like in our own bad moods and trying not to let it impact the other person.
Yeah.
Rachel does make me happy.
Aww, you make me happy.
She makes me want to say the following thing. You make me so very happy. I'm so glad you came into my life.
Aww, thanks, babe.
You're welcome, darling.
I feel the same.
Eric, why you became insecure when last person questioned you? I do become insecure sometimes. I don't know what you're referring to. Usually when I usually am not insecure, whatever the bad behavior, I do engage in some bad responses. Like I may engage in a necessarily abrasive response. I may engage in even a response that conveys like an inadequate respect for the other person. You know, I've been known to do some name calling, various other things, but I mean, it's a pretty big stretch, I guess, to call that insecurity.
Good another question here, I guess. I would ask, at which point did you start using the typology system?
Well,
I'll contextualize this as well. You said in psychology and things like that, in order to bring up like a circumstance, that would be like a point in time where things change. That is basically what I'm doing. I'm asking, at which point would you begin using a system to like describe your own personality?
At what point did I? Or would I?
Well, typology is a system that uses very specific language and has these specific terms associated to it, unless, which I would think is unlikely, that you would be adopting that system without realizing it until you did happen to start using that language. But the second part of that,
I'm asking you, are you asking at what point did I, or what? I thought you said at what point would I?
At which point did you begin using it, and at which point would you discard it, presuming you gained a fluid control of those circumstances without the system?
Okay, well, let me answer the second question first. I was throwing it away would look like this. I would say, here's how that frame I used to incorporate became subsumed by this other frame. And that process of change would still necessarily incorporate that previous frame. It has to be in there to be referred to as being changed from, so to speak, right? So, and I'm not going to forget that. I'm not going to land on my new spot and forget where I came from, because I know where the sort of intellectual paths have led me from and to, you know. So now I'm going to answer the first point. The point I did was the first time I encountered MBTI, I was in my early 30s. I just encountered type descriptions and MBTI stuff. And I thought, well, that's kind of fun. It's kind of like astrology, but this one really gets me a lot more right. It's like, wow, this ENTP thing, I'm so like that. Wow. And I also thought at that moment, to be honest, I burst into tears when I first read about it because I thought, oh, now I know what's wrong with me. For now, the motto of this channel is "There's nothing wrong with you." But then I didn't think about it really much again for a while because there wasn't anything cognitive function, so it wasn't in my mind a real model of anything. It was just sort of a taxonomy, an arbitrary taxonomy, and it happened to get me right, you know. Then, and when I started doing YouTube, I began YouTube mostly by making philosophy videos, stuff about linguistics and epistemology and stuff like that weren't even made to be instructive videos. It were just basically me very slowly talking out some thinking I was doing in ways that were intended to be archival rather than audience driven. But
yeah, I've seen a couple of channels like that, and I can understand why you do it.
And at some point, though, I made a video about I encountered cognitive functions on the internet. I don't know how I got there. Who knows where you land. But and I was like, oh, look at this. There's an explanation. So why an ENTP is like an ENTP. And then I made the video. Okay, so I'm an ENTP according to this thing, and that means according to this, I have yeah. That video did like 100 times better than any other video I'd ever done. And I was like, oh wait, you mean I could possibly actually have people watch my YouTube channel? Like, I assumed it was impossible coming in. I was like, nobody cares about you, Eric. Nobody wants to see what you have to say. So, you know, the nice thing about that is you can just talk out your ideas now in peace and not have to worry about anybody looking at it because nobody gives a fuck about you. So, but then when all of a sudden I got a video where it had like a lot of views, I said, oh my God, could I actually get people to watch me? Maybe I should try a little harder. Or they seem to like this Myers-Briggs stuff. Okay, let me talk more about that. Well, you know, naturally I engage with it the way I engage with things. I like go through things and start talking about, this is bullshit. What is this thing? This makes no sense at all. A lot of videos like that, you know?
This is interesting because you described yourself earlier as someone that would be very iterative and be constantly generating rather than exploiting a certain resource. But I would state that as a fact of life, you need to exploit a resource. Otherwise, you don't have any sort of stability, and you need that stability in order to accomplish basic things like feeding yourself. So you've encountered an opportunity here which allows for, you know, oh, people might pay to watch this, something like that, right? And then you would shift towards that because you would need to meet it.
No, I made the explanation at the time. The explanation was this. Oh my God, I really want people to pay attention to me. I think I'm going to be able to get attention like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still my explanation.
But that's exploiting the resource.
Okay, great. But it's for an outcome of social benefit, so benefiting how other people's impressions are of me.
Right, but you described yourself earlier as someone that was iterative and wasn't capable of that.
No, I didn't. I didn't say that at all. I said, in fact, as an ENTP, I have two extroverted functions. My first and third slot, which compares my absolute values. The third slot is extroverted feeling, which means I really care more about what people think about me than about being right. But I keep trying to get people to like me. I'm smart by being super, super, super right.
It seems to take very little circumstantially to flip those diagnostics.
I mean, that's a pretty half-assed and generic response. So a pretty specific warrant.
My assertion is that it's a half-assed and half-baked explanation to begin with.
I mean, you haven't sustained that assertion. I've had excellent answers for all your very good questions. I mean, you came in with a lot of the right kind of objections, and they do apply to almost all typology. You know, with a lot of the right kind of questions that would be the right way to put pressure on people who are thinking about it incorrectly. But you got it. You didn't expect, and you need to start to allow for the fact that what would it look like if somebody did have all the right answers to this, or the best answers to this, and what would it look like if somebody was doing it correctly? Because in fact, Nobody else you would ever talk to about typology would ever be even remotely as convincing as me. So if I can't convince you, then maybe you're intentionally being unconvinced. At least convince you that that what you just said a second ago would be dramatically reductive. What time do I have work? Calendar.
It may be dramatically reductive socially, but you've already indicated that's not what my preference is.
I mean,
I'd rather be correct.
Well, you got two. You have two absolute values.
Hold on.
Hold on. You have two absolute values. Your absolute values are correctness. That's true, and singularity, or what you might say relevance, which is a inverted intuition. The best answer, the single best thing, is something you prioritize. And in this instance, you're still convinced that the single best answer is the sort of relativist framing frame that you have. And I'm telling you, well, in this instance, it's not. There actually is, surprisingly enough, empirics to justify it. And I get where you're coming from. I would be in the same place you are right now. If I were a knower who encountered a bunch of typology shit, I'd certainly be in this place. You've known correctly based on what you encountered heretofore. Be prepared, though, for when and if you were to encounter something that was convincing. And it's like, because what I've told you is stuff that validates as very carefully made claims, stuff that I'm able to distinguish between which claims are using what kind of warrant, and a bunch of other things. So there's no reason at all that would be sustained universally to conclude that the same disdain you had for this thing coming in is still substantiated. Now,
it's not no reason, but earlier I did ask what the value was that you could provide through the conversation, and that response does at least answer that question, even if that was not intentional. Because I asked what the value was that you could provide, and you're providing me with effectively what a warning is that, I may be like you, but in like an earlier phase, and may move towards the same mode of thought.
I mean, that's a generous way of putting it, actually. Because the thing is, I think you're unlike me. You're where I would have been if I were a knower, which is say, because I'm a creator type, the whole time I was doing that stuff, not only was I critiquing shit, I was trying to come up with the alternative that worked better and failing, because I'm very trial and error. I have to do things wrong several times before I get it right. I'm not actually saying that you're like me and that you're at a previous stage of development. I'm saying if I were a knower, encountering the world as it is, and being the best knower I could possibly be, I would know what you knew coming into this. All right, I'm going to wrap this up. It's 3 hours. Thank you so much for talking to me, whatever your name is. I really enjoyed this conversation, and hope it was enjoyable.
My name is Doug.
Doug, nice to meet you. Thank you for being such a reasonable and intelligent human being.
No worries. Cheers, Eric. Thanks for the conversation. I'll chat to you another time, probably.
Cool. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
A nice one.